You are good to go.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Willington Board of Education special meeting work session. It is November 6th, 2024. We are calling the meeting to order at 6:34 p.m. This evening, we're going to be discussing assessment tools used here in Willington, and we have our administrators prepared to present to us this evening. And they will be introduced by our very own Mr. Stevens.
Thanks. So a couple of points just for tonight. So this presentation is online already. So if you want to see what we're looking at, I can actually show you exactly where it is for folks that are online at home or in the room. Let me just share my screen. So if you go to the Willington Public Schools page, you hover over curriculum and you go to the Smarter Balanced testing results. This presentation is right here, 23-24 Smarter Balanced testing results presentation. So everything we're going through tonight is right there. This is up to you as a board. We have obviously a bunch of slides to go through. If you want to stop at checkpoints, you can stop at checkpoints that are following like a section. So there'll be like an iReady section, there'll be an SBAC section, there'll be an accountability index section. Do you want to pause for questions at that point or slide by slide?
Maybe see how it goes. Are the online viewers able to?
They can unmute at any time. So we want to make sure that we have some sort of protocol. So
Okay, probably by section.
so if they just raise their hand, however we do it.
The reason I say slide by slide is because someone may have the stats on the slide and may forget by the time we get to the second.
Probably won't be there.
Jen and John, do you hear that?
You slide by slide question.
I'm actually gonna, if I introduce you, it's kind of weird because the camera's gonna be on me, I just realized. So it may make more sense for you to talk and just say hello and your name and your role, please.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Lisa Cushing, I'm the elementary school principal at Center Elementary School.
I'm Mary Kate Shaughnessy. I'm the principal of Hall Memorial.
Hi, Marcia McGilly, Director of Pupil Services.
All right, so let me share my screen and we will get going. That's an interesting name. Perfect. Okay. So first slide, comprehensive student success data sources. When we review, I'm gonna give this to you, Roger. It's gonna be a lot easier. Thank you so much. When we review data, it's from a variety of sources. We have standardized testing results from SBAC, from iReady. We have curriculum assessments that we review, and then we use other pertinent data that's from the district, such as attendance and discipline, and then just student status, things like special education status, if they're an intervention, if they qualify for free and reduced lunch. We look at all of those different variations. It's not the only data we look at, the things that are on screen here, but some of the important information. We have, as an admin team, we have the ability to sort data and look at our students based upon a lot of factors. So if we wanted to put all of our data in one spreadsheet, and if we wanted to sort and look at just if you were qualifying for special education, how you did, we could do that. If we wanted to sort it by students that were attending or participating in clubs or sports, we could do that. Any of those, the way we sort the the factors, we can look at that data. Okay. As far as the 23-24 data, the see it, you need something?
No, I
Okay.
should have thought of this sooner.
Oh, they can look that way if they want to turn around.
To get a chiropractor here.
There you go.
Are we blocking?
No.
What you'll see, that turn around. Take these red chairs and then if you want to speak, of course, just, sorry,
You're good.
Willington, and then just spin yourself around, you know what I mean? This will all be better.
The whole thing will be recorded.
Oh, yeah, it's all
So we
recorded.
can
Yep,
Go
we're
back
recording.
and look at this stuff.
For sure. Yep,
Yeah.
Yeah, is that better?
it's all recorded.
Or can do it, I'm good.
Go ahead, swing around if you want to.
You see this recording, right?
Okay.
You can see it on that one.
That would be great.
It should be recording in the cloud.
You have that recording.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as far as the 23-24 data goes, I just wanted to highlight what the Department of Education, what they noted as, just as far as statewide improvements. They noted improvements in attendance, in, math overall scores, in science scores. There's always the national piece here about the pandemic too, the dip, where, you know, we erased 2 decades of growth. And that was, they were talking about 9-year-olds when they did that. And that still exists. It's across the country. The dip is still there. It's no different for Willington.
Those current 9-year-olds.
So it was, they're probably 11, but you can imagine it's not just 9-year-olds. There's a group of kids. Anybody who was learning to read during the pandemic that missed that specific phonics instruction or time, I would say was greatly impacted. Okay, so, chronic absenteeism. This is, what you're looking at is, some towns around us that, this is straight off of Ed's site, if you wanna look at, Willington data or other data. This is a good place to go. It is EDSIGHT. It's the state's portal basically for data. Sometimes there's things that you're gonna see today that you might not be able to see because it's hidden behind, basically I have an online login and there's a public facing. So some of the stuff that you're gonna see you might not be able to see on your own. When we reviewed the data here, we noted that there's an improvement in overall levels of chronic absenteeism from 22-23, which is good. Some of this is really COVID protocols in place over the years, and that's why you see the numbers drop. A student is chronically absent when they miss 10% or greater of the total number of days enrolled. So our numbers are in line with other districts. We're not unique. Both schools have committees that look at student attendance. They review it regularly. They implement a variety of strategies when kids are not coming to school. The more days they miss, the higher level of the strategies that they're implementing. But still, when you look at this number, over 10% of our kids missed over 18 days of school last year. That's a lot. 18 days of instruction is a lot. Some kids missed significantly more than that. It's something that we look at, and it's, I always say, don't take this as an excuse, it's just a fact. It's a piece of data that we look at. The one thing that when we met and talked about our data, that it showed that the group of students that were identified for intervention support for English language arts or math, who are also chronically absent, you can imagine those are the kids that were impacted the greatest. Their scores across, when we look at them, were the lowest. It also impacted special education a little bit, but it was really, really strong around students who were receiving intervention and chronically absent. So as you can imagine, if you are a student who needs additional support and you've missed 40 days of school, that's a problem. Questions about that?
So what's the simple breakout of that number? So the students requiring intervention who are also chronically absent, about how much of those 44 does that make up?
I can't tell you by individual data. I have the individual data on a different thing. I just can't pull it because that's student names.
You know, I don't need names or anything.
No,
Like in a roundabout.
because I'm just thinking we pulled it by grade. My gut is half. Half of kids.
So about 20 or so.
I
Because it's
know,
44.
the 44 was the number of days absent that Phil was mentioning. I don't think it was a percentage of students.
Correct, the number, so
No, that's your student count, your percentage.
Oh, the student count. I
44
understand.
students, yeah,
Yes,
44
right.
students were chronically absent, in K to 8.
Right.
And I would say half of that is about what we're looking at.
Okay.
Approximately 2 to 3 per grade is when we look at it, is probably a fair, guess.
Okay.
And this is something that, you know, when we got into the data, something, Arthur, that's important to know. There are some, pieces of data that we looked at that are not presented tonight, that are something that we're thinking about for future. The Dibble scores is something that we looked at. There are students that we have that missed 35 days of school that are doing great. That's a conundrum for us as well, like, why is that? And so it's not just that they missed school and that's why they're in intervention, because it was data for both sides.
No, I understand, but the point of that question was, if you've got a large concentration of those kids affecting one grade, that's gonna pull that particular grade way down. But if you've got it spread across, it's gonna weigh it down, not as much, but it's gonna weigh it down more evenly. So I'm just trying to,
Yeah.
and I jumping slightly forward, I'm not going to go into it, but I was looking at the data going forward, and there's a lot of inconsistencies, and I'm just trying to pinpoint some inconsistencies and some possible reasons.
So, yeah, so one of the things, and I know, Jen, I see your hand, one of the things that we looked at, so in this testing year in 23-24, we had approximately 256 kids, 57 are identified special education. So you're like 20%. So between, and again, I don't like to say the why, like that's because there are kids that are identified that did well. But when you think about kids that are chronically absent, kids that are in intervention, and kids that are already identified as special education, needing special education services, that makes up that percentage of students of, you know, sometimes why we're not doing great. It's not that they can't get out of there, and it's not the only reason, but it's part of it.
Yeah.
Jen, you should be able to unmute.
It was operator error, sorry. Um, I don't have a ton to add except astonishment that that percentage is so high of chronic absenteeism. Like that for our size of a district, that's a huge chunk of kids who are not accessing curriculum in a regular way. I don't know if, there's so much information today, I don't want to belabor this, but as we go forward, I wonder if there's an opportunity to have a discussion about that maybe a little deeper, because if kids aren't there, we obviously can't access them. And I feel like as a Board of Ed, that's our job, is to make sure that the kids are there.
We can answer that now. I mean, MK, if you want to speak to.
Yeah.
We have assistance teams, we have attendance team meetings, and you want to talk about some of the things you go through. Before she says that though, one thing I want to remind you of, so when we send out our letters, parents know if their kid is chronically absent. Sometimes we know, and I don't want to say it's okay, but it's okay. Meaning someone is really ill and we're very aware of what's going on. There's great communication and we're doing what we can to make sure that the kid gets to school when they can. There are times though where families go on vacation, numerous times during the year. They hit that. There are times where, and think about COVID, where, you know, you had to be out for 5 days and then you get sick and then you go on vacation. They hit those numbers. So the attendance teams are very aware of those things. And do you want to talk about some of the strategies, some of the things that you guys do?
Sure. We hired the mental health care specialist, Elizabeth Nizer, at our school, and she's actually shared between the two buildings. And she has really been charged with developing attendance support plans. And what that means is we, after a certain number of days, call a meeting with the parent and the student usually, and we talk about perhaps what the cause is for the student to be absent, because we do have kids who do have school avoidance, we have kids who have mental health care struggles, we have kids who have trauma backgrounds or who have anxiety. We have to get past what those reasons are, maybe that's a peer issue. So we kind of dig a little bit deeper as to the reasons, because no two kids are the same. And then that mental health care specialist works out an attendance plan for that student with different check-ins. Usually it does involve some time with her on, they work on executive functioning, they work on scheduling, they work on what's your nighttime routine, just so that the student has a toolbox that has things in it that they can use and strategize with. They also have gone out to homes and visited students in home visits, because it makes a student feel like they can get to school if they know somebody at school is there and wants them to be there. Another thing that we have done at the middle school is we have changed our late pass policy, so it's not late, you're not late, it's welcome to school. And it's, we're so happy to see you. The office staff has been trained in how to greet students in a friendly way, how to assess, how are you doing today? And there's a Likert scale on the bottom with different emojis to kind of give the teacher an idea when the student hands them the pass that I'm a little bit sad, I'm okay, or I'm really happy, and that way it sets the tone for how that student's welcomed into the classroom.
Anything to add to that?
Sure, so at the elementary school, I want to give a big shout out to the nurse. She does a tremendous job communicating with families. We've set up a new email address, where parents can email this, CES office at willingtonct.org. That comes to the two ladies in the office, the nurse and myself. Even if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, your child is vomiting. We get that you're not gonna be able to, get up and call us, but parents can email that and just say, hey, Johnny's not coming in today for this reason. And the nurse at the elementary level takes copious notes, is in constant communication with families. We've reached out, we have the attendance committee meetings, once a month. We go over each list, talk about the reasons why the student might have been absent. Oh, this one had a tonsillectomy, had to be out for a certain amount of days. It was painful to come in, whatever the case may be. And then I send out letters each month to families, depending on what the number of absences are. So the first round went out last month. It was if a student reached 4, we reach out to families and say, hey, just a heads up, your child is at X number. And then I continue to send those letters after, we reach a certain amount of days. And we work with the mental health specialist to reach out to families, potentially going on home visits and those kinds of things. So we've implemented a lot of what I think are really positive strategies going forward to try to continue to reduce those.
One of the other things that we do is we make extra time at the end of the school day if a student's missed a lot of classwork. They do have time to get support, like for Wednesdays is a club day. So we make that day available for in-office help if a student needs support and anything academic, if they're falling behind. Because one of the things that stops students from coming to school, if they've missed a lot of school, is the anxiety that they won't be able to catch up. So we want to take that barrier out of the way.
That's the question I want to ask. If I'm a student and I'm sick, how does my homework, my reading assignments, how does that get to me? Is it all electronic now and can you just send it home?
Not all the time. We do have Google Classrooms that do allow many assignments to be assigned online, but the parent typically gets in touch with our school nurse and our school counselor, and our team of teachers will put together materials for the student. We usually have it on the front counter, a parent can come and pick it up. We also have dropped it. If the whole family's sick, if they have COVID, if they're quarantined, I mean, we've had a lot of very significant illnesses recently, a lot of pneumonia. And so we will drop it off at the student's house if necessary. And for every absence that a child has, they have that additional day. So they don't have to have everything done the minute they come back to school, especially if they need additional academic support.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Last question, I'm not gonna belabor this slide, but with that information, could we drill down further and figure out if the chronic absenteeism is mostly illness related, or at least presents as illness related versus?
Absolutely.
We know.
We know
We
at
know.
this point,
Yeah.
yeah. Every student on here that, has an attendance plan,
you know, they have goals, they have, you know, things that the teams are working on. If they have an IEP, we'll often go back to special ed to say, you know, is there something else that we need to put in the IEP? There has been times where we've actually made referrals to special ed because of the chronic absenteeism. So we know all that information.
Yeah.
So, we're gonna talk about cohort analysis real quick, which is unique in, small town USA. So one of the pieces of information that we review, is the percentage of students that remain consistent in Willington. And we're doing that from the first year of SBAC testing. So we wanted to see if students who remain consistent outperform others. That's something that we look at. You can see the green column is the percentage of students consistent in 23-24 from their first SBAC test. The grade 3 row, because their first test was in 23-24, that number is from, compared to 22-23. So if you look at, grade 3, 97.22% were consistent, same group of kids compared to the year before. If you come down to 6th grade, 69.44% were the same compared to their first year of SBAC testing in 2021. When we talk about cohort, we're not really talking about the same group of kids. It can change. Some groups, it does, you know, end up staying consistent. So the reason we do this comparison is really to determine if we truly have that cohort data or not. And you know, a few kids moving in or out, just it makes a difference and it can drastically change our performance. Again, fact, it's not making an excuse for where scores are, but that's data that we look at. So as you go through the presentation today and it says cohort data, it's almost like it's in air quotes, it's in quotes for a reason. Because in times it's not really consistent. The 24-25 column in yellow, we added just to see this year who's consistent back to that first year. And it's ironic that some of the numbers went up. So there's more kids. So somebody moved out, meaning, and it's, you know, if you look at grade 5 and grade 4, of the 33 and of the 42 kids, those kids have been here since their first year. So somebody moved in, somebody moved out, if that makes sense. The other piece that I'm gonna share today is, I think it's important, we talk about transparency all the time and people will say, well, I saw different numbers on the website than what you presented, Bill. I'm presenting the numbers tonight exactly as SBAC is reported in Ed site. They include all of the students who are taking the test, even if they are in outplaced facilities. Not just students in center and hall schools. So we can and do drill down to that. It's easy to do. But I just want to make sure you know when I present that tonight that they're included in that. A small number of kids at a grade level can change our scores. When you talk about a grade level of 30 kids, it matters. Okay, questions about the cohort piece?
Real quick.
Yeah.
So if I look across like grade 3 and 24, which is now grade 4. You basically essentially looks like you've lost 3 kids, but of those remaining 33, those were the same 33 that were of the 35 from grade 3, right?
Correct. We have 33 consistent kids now from 22-23.
Okay, I just wanted to.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking for a few minutes.
All right, so I'm speaking to grades 3 and 4. So in Connecticut, students take SBAC, Smarter Balanced Consortium, for the first time in 3rd grade. Despite students taking short practice tests, they're called the FIABs, the focused interim assessment blocks. They're designed to familiarize students with SBAC. Students still struggled, as the results show. We did see good growth in grade 4 from last year. We do need to continue that trend. We also need to see a good increase in the grade 3 scores. So the Connecticut State Department of Education continues to emphasize growth scores, though not percentages. So that's really what we're focusing on, the growth scores.
So when you're looking at this, the idea is we've been trying to look across years, and even again, even though it says cohort. If you just look at the grade 8, and I'll let MK jump in a second and share her piece, but if you just follow that same row across, 67% COVID, 24, 31, 42, 31, it's the same group of kids in that grade, if that makes sense. MK?
Okay, before you start.
Yep.
But can you, anybody just clarify, so those who aren't familiar, it says percentage of students at level 3 or above, can you clarify what level?
She's gonna.
Yes, I'm gonna do that,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
So at the middle school, students obviously take the SBAC test each spring and have taken it since grade 3. So they are more familiar with the platform, and we have taken FIABs as well. The scores that are shown are the percentage of students who score 3, which is proficient, and a 4, which is exemplary. So there's a certain range of scores that will make a student proficient in those areas. Anything below a proficiency is a 2, and then a 1 obviously is much lower than that. So in this case, in grades 5, 6, and 8, the data shows that there was little improvement from the first time that the students took the test as 3rd graders, and some scores actually declined. The exception to this was grade 7, which you can see had an increase to 71%, which is just very, very outstanding. We have been able to identify the teaching strategies and the different interventions that have taken place in that grade, and we're sharing those across the board. We also can clearly see, and specifically, if you take a look at that grade 8 group of kids, I mean, they had 67% were proficient or above. They come back from COVID and now it's 24%. So that's a very significant decrease. And research has shown that math scores were impacted very, very much by COVID because it's a difficult thing to do at home.
What does level 3 mean again?
Proficient. So it means that they are, I would say,
Fair to say on grade level.
on grade level, right?
At
So
benchmark.
they're performing where they should be for that time of year at that grade level,
On that assessment.
on that
By
particular
the state
assessment.
standard.
Right,
Yes.
and I do wanna point out again that this is a standardized test that, measures one piece of a student's performance
At one point.
at one point in time.
Yeah.
In the late spring.
Can you expand a little bit on how the SBAC works? Because I hear conflicting stories about how they're tested via SBAC as far as, so, for example, I'm hearing that the questions are scaled depending on their answers, or the amount of questions are scaled depending on their answers. So can you just expand upon that a little bit?
I believe it's called an adaptive test.
Mhm.
What that means is that a student, everyone starts at the same, beginning, and then students may answer questions correctly or incorrectly, which takes you on a different path with different questions, maybe to test a skill, that same skill. As the student progresses, their questions are different than other kids' questions, or they're at a different level. So some students are able to continue and continue and continue, and others stop. And it's all on a computer platform. Many kids have to toggle back and forth between screens. There's a calculator right there. So there's a lot of manipulation on an electronic platform that kids have to do.
So if I ask a question, grade 8, our last grade, 31%, only 31% of our students leaving our system, if you will, are at grade levels, that's correct?
spring, right?
Yep, late spring, grade 8. The students, we had 43 students in the 8th grade. And 31% of the students who took the test scored at a 3 or above.
How is that possible if they were in grade 7 at a much higher percentage?
It might not be the same group of students. They may have been students moving in and out,
It's one day. It
and it's a
also
day.
could be that I just blew it off, or I worked really hard. It's one snapshot in time.
More challenging content as well.
So are you going to compare those to state? at some point, because I think it would also be interesting, did all of the eighth graders in this state test lower than, or were their scores lower than ours?
I don't know, but I'll be honest, there's some superintendents that, like to compare it to other districts. I could care less. I feel like I worry about how our group does. I think that we could look at the trend, but I'm not sure what it does for us in big picture. I know we have our feelings about what happened with that eighth grade group.
Yep.
There's a reason we've kind of looked at our testing protocols and how many tests we're giving in the spring now. Because when you do iReady and you do the science NGSS test and you do SBAC, and we're talking about days upon days upon days of testing. Pretty easy to go, I've seen enough.
Yeah, I'm done.
And I'm not making excuses. We fully look at this and go, we gotta do better. The great thing about being small is we can look at every kid and go, that kid performed exactly where we expected. That student outperformed what we expected, and that student underperformed. And we can compare them 1,000 different ways.
And look at their other assessments to get a larger picture of how that student actually is growing.
Right.
Yes.
Because that is one thing.
That's the most important thing, right? I always try to, look at a bunch of different assessments and kind of look at the big picture, not one test, one day, one moment in time.
Right. The other thing this doesn't show, and this is why the state has the two comparisons. They have the growth model and then they have the, your overall achievement. And this is the achievement portion. And then, the piece that this doesn't show, you might have in the eighth grade group, you could have 10 kids that were 3 points, 1 point away from the next level. And those are things we look at too. We can see their scale score and go, they missed a question would have brought them up to the next level. They, in the build out, they actually call it a high low or a high 2 or a low 2, a high 3 or a low 3, a high 4 or a low 4. We can see those things as well in the scale score. Again, it doesn't matter all of those things. We all look at that and go, it's gotta be better. We just need to make sure we're setting the right, we're performing where we expect to perform. And we're educating kids where they are and that they continue to grow, and that the gaps, if there are gaps, that we're moving faster to close those gaps. So we'll get to the growth in a minute, but can we jump to the language arts?
Yes. So that was math. So in language arts, the higher percentage of third graders achieving at or above grade level, that proficient or exemplary, can be attributed in large part to daily explicit targeted phonics instruction with foundational support provided by letters training, professional development that all of the elementary school classroom teachers participated in. We did see a decent increase, again in fourth grade, but still have some significant growth needed. Again, the State Department of Education continues to emphasize those growth scores, not necessarily the percentages.
And at the middle school, the scores for language arts are fairly consistent in grades 5 and 7. Grade 6 saw a 7% increase, while grade 8 dropped 10%. There's that grade 8 again. We expect to see scores for this year improve with the implementation of a comprehensive language arts program in terms of CKLA. These scores represent proficiency. However, as Lisa mentioned, we're very interested in seeing growth. So you'll see when we get to the following slides, more data around the growth that our students made, which is something that we really rely heavily on. The one performance point just doesn't give a clear picture.
The crew, and Lisa talked about phonics instruction, that group has been through all of a lot of our new science of reading work, and the start of that. and the letters training, they're experiencing the outcome of that PD. But they're also still a bit of COVID babies with socialization.
Yes.
And you look at the fifth, sixth, seventh grade group, they were all first, second, third graders reading during that important phonics time. So, we do think the CPLA piece is gonna help out here, and we'll talk about that at the end.
Language arts also includes writing, which was greatly impacted by COVID.
And they write a sample for this test.
There's a variety of different ways that they use their writing skills. They do usually write, there's short answers, there's multiple choice, and I don't think there's a larger writing sample like we used
No.
to see.
Okay.
But they do have to formulate answers and, those types of things, or recognize, in terms of editing or punctuation or grammar, which in our prior curriculums were not skills that were,
There,
highlighted. It was, writing workshop, reading workshop, and it wasn't around explicit grammar instruction or any of those conventions that we see as necessary in language arts.
The other good thing about this is, all of the professional development that we've been doing, the Fridays, the early closings on Fridays.
Yes.
This is where we see the benefits of that.
Yes. We also are able to have those vertical meetings where the grades can meet together because they don't have common planning time. Where the fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade teachers can all meet with Kristen to talk about, what they're seeing, what they're doing, and because the curriculum is content-based and it is it has a scope and sequence that does spiral in terms of skills specifically.
Before you leave this slide, I'm reading this correctly. 62% of our students in the 8th grade are not at state proficiency level.
The students that were tested, correct?
When you say the student that were tested, those were our 8th graders, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Looks like we have a few questions online there.
they can unmute.
Okay, great.
Just
Nick,
call.
did you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Hey, it's Nick Tella, Myrtle Road. Hey, so I know there's been discussion about new curriculums being placed in. Have there been a new curriculum for math and then also for language arts?
For math, we have the illustrative math program, which was adopted, and now most of the students in the middle school have been through, the 8th grade has been through that program for at least 4 years. At the elementary school, it was adopted a couple of years back.
3 years.
3 years ago.
You
So-
said that's math, the math? I'm sorry, what was that,
Yeah,
the math you said?
Yep.
Okay,
And illustrative math is a very inquiry-based, problem-solving curriculum where students actually apply their math skills. It's not just simply computational, it's authentic. CKLA was just adopted this year based on what the state had gotten back to us around our language arts curriculum. Because before that, we had Readers and Writers Workshop, which was shown to be not chosen by the state of Connecticut as an efficient language arts approach.
okay, and I don't have the slide pulled up, so, okay, so the math has been in for 4 years, but we were seeing a decrease in the scoring here for the SPAC for 8th grade when I was looking at the 8th grade.
Yes,
Yes, okay, thank you.
this slide is language arts. I don't have that other slide in front of me, but
To be fair, your grade 5 from 4 years ago went up 7 grade.
Yep.
So.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
One other point about having done the science of reading.
Yeah.
Extensive science of reading, before the new program was adopted. I think that has probably strongly affected the more recent scores.
Nick, the other thing I'll add is that one thing that, we've been famous for, if you want to call that famous, is our hodgepodge and pulling best resources together to make something and not using one consistent program K-8, that's changed. So they did not have illustrative math at the elementary level, they do now, and so we are illustrative math K-8, consistent language all the way through. consistent scope and sequence all the way through when things come spiral back. And it's the same thing with CKLA. CKLA is actually pre-K through 8th grade. And on the English language arts side. The other piece I was gonna add is that one thing that we've also recently added is looking at consistency of, again, taking away the hodgepodge of an intervention program for math using what's called a Bridges math program. And we're using that pre-K through 8th grade as well now for students that need additional support in addition to illustrative math. So that consistency for us is something that's, I think it's been missing. And it's in place now, which is good.
And recently increasing our math intervention support at the middle school too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, now at the middle school, we have a certified teacher who does math intervention, and we have seen tremendous growth with that, and we'll talk about that in later slides. One thing I would like to point out is that, you know, we would hope to see and are looking forward to seeing an increase in our language arts proficiency on this particular assessment with the implementation of CKLA. It may take a couple of years because the students have to be exposed to it. I don't know if we'll see a major change in 8th grade, but students who are in 6th grade that have CKLA, by the time they get to 8th grade, we should see a sizable increase.
One point about the consistency, when I went to second grade curriculum night, the second grade teachers mentioned how they could see the progress with that class because that class had the illustrative math K1 and now they were in grade 2 and it was, they could see how positive it was.
Yeah.
Donna, did you want to unmute yourself there?
Yes, thank you. Donna Cook, 77 Common Road. So when I look at these SBAC schedules, the math pre-COVID, we had only 67% of our kids meeting minimum standards. When you do the same thing for the language arts, only 49% of our students were meeting minimum standards. If the kids, and what frustrates me is this look at improvement. If you're failing and you don't have the basic building blocks and you move the kids forward and they're still failing because they're missing the basic building blocks, we look at these scores and it's such a disservice to the children because it looks like we have most of our kids aren't meeting minimum standards. And I'm looking at, if you look at the language arts and you just look at the 4th grade, so I'm going to make the assumption, which might be incorrect, that the same teachers are teaching 4th grade straight along. I know that sometimes teachers do change, but we're looking at horrible scores per grade. It's not just the curriculum, it's the teachers, it's the environment, it's the home. But it seems like we've constantly been told, as long as they're improving, it's okay. But if you're still failing, when is somebody going to do something so that the kids are learning what they need to learn and they're not failing? That's where my frustration is. And we keep putting tons of money into tons of things and changing all sorts of stuff. And you just said, well, we're changing this and we may not see the results for 2 years. Our kids don't have 2 years. They need to get with it sooner. So whatever needs to be cut out of the fluff so that they get the basics, because this is scary. This is scary for our kids and chronic. It's not like a one blip in time. I'm wondering if you look at the scores a few years before the COVID, if there was ever a good year where most of our kids were passing. Thank you.
I would like to just address that. You said that students are failing. That is not accurate. Students did not score well on this assessment in this point in time. Having meetings with Mr. DiLoretto and the people at EO Smith, our kids from 8th grade who go on to EO, their performance is outstanding. They, we receive their PSAT scores, we receive their, after their first semester averages, and our students are performing, they're outperforming other towns
So-
so this is an assessment that is not necessarily measuring students' academic success in other areas.
So if it's not giving us good result, if the kids really do know how to read and do math, and the assessments are telling us that they can't, why are we using these assessments?
That's a very good
State
question.
mandate, we have
I
to.
mean, Phil just talked about, all the time for all the testing. If these tests are not giving you an accurate representation of how our students are doing, I think then it's a disservice to them to take the time out, and when the teachers could be doing something more productive with them.
I think there's, I don't think you're wrong on that. I think there's two things. The first slide I showed tonight with all of the other pieces of data that we look at, I think that's important. That's why we look at other things, because this is one measure. And you may get a kid that just doesn't test well and is always gonna struggle on this, but can do it. That's one thing we look at. The other piece is that this is a required assessment by the state. They're looking at this and comparing town to town. When you see a grade level of, what's that? When you see a grade level of 100 students, 200 students in bigger towns, and 5 kids blow it off, you don't really see the blip. Or 5 kids have a bad day. You see that in Willington, and again, I'm not denying the scores need to improve. Like, we're just saying this is one piece, and we go through kid by kid. We're showing you grade by grade, but we go student by student. We can see their individual scores and we can see their growth. And to be honest with you, there's some kids that fall into what Peter just said, that 62%, that may have had outstanding growth, but they didn't get a 3 or a 4.
So I have a question I want to ask about that, if I may.
Well, I think.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, hi, so my question is, if you say that the students, because you talk to E.O. Smith, you talk to other high schools and stuff that they go to. Why is it if our students are so bad here? What is E.O. Smith doing differently with their state testing that you guys aren't doing with the students here that's causing them to do better there versus here? They're the same students.
They're not doing better or worse. This is one test. Students don't take the SBAC after later on. They take other assessments.
And also, why not look at how other students in other towns are doing, taking the same test?
Cause I can't control them. What am I gonna do with that data?
No, but you can look at and see, okay, they're doing this, but you can talk to the teachers, you can talk to the superintendents
Sure, we do that all the time.
and say, hey, why are your students testing better than ours?
And there are some schools that place a tremendous emphasis on the test as well. They have test parties, they have test incentives, it's, test, that's not what we put our value in. This test does not follow the student anywhere. This test does not predict success academically. This test is mandated by the state of Connecticut, and that we have to take it.
So a question, if I can direct it to you.
Sure.
So I get a principal of Paul School, but I forgot your name.
Mary Kay Tashanis,
Mary, thank you.
you're welcome.
So I'm gonna assume there's some correlation, as I think you just alluded to, between such a high percentage of students being below the test proficiency level and their actual academic performance. I'm just gonna make that assumption, and I don't care about the numbers. I'm more interested in how if that correlation exists, how I as a student can get better. And my question is, let's say I'm that student. Can I stay after school and read more or do more math problems and get caught up? And get out of this situation.
So the SBAC test is not a test that we use to diagnose or to kind of move kids in intervention. We use iReady for that. So we'll be talking about that in later
Oh,
slides.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get ahead of.
No, that's okay. But what our teachers do, and specifically more so in the elementary school, is that they do have data team meetings where they look at student data on tests. They determine which skills need to be further implemented or further given foundation for. We have intervention classes where teachers do targeted instruction around certain skills. Students move in and out sometimes very fluidly, and specifically in tier 2, because there's 3 tiers. Tier 1 is what everybody gets in your classroom. Tier 2 is students who need slightly additional support. Tier 3 is when we have seen that they're more than 2 grade levels behind. So it's very targeted instruction in those times where they're pulled out. We have Learning Lab at Center School, and at our school we have WIN, which is What I Need, where they receive their targeted intervention in a much smaller setting. We do also offer, other types of support for kids academically. I'm sorry. That's okay.
Okay. Ralph, did you wanna go ahead and?
Good evening, everyone. Ralph Tillis here. One of the phrases I've heard several times is "of the students who took the test." A curious question, roughly what percentage of the students do opt to take this testing?
Good question, Ralph.
Mm-hmm.
So our numbers, I think, are typically between 92 and 100% by grade level. And I'll be honest with you, we've had students opt out that would raise our scores. Some of our, students that are getting A's straight across the board are high flyers in iReady. We know would be a 4 in SBAC. Their parents choose to take them out and not have the additional testing. Not always true, but we know who those kids are. And so families just choose to pull kids out, and we actually get penalized for it. Later on, you'll see on our accountability index, because they look at our participation rates, and there's really nothing we can do about it.
It's not a requirement?
Sure, it's a requirement, but if the parent doesn't send their kid and says you're not taking this.
So parents have to write a letter. They're authorized by the state of Connecticut. If parents write a letter and say, I so-and-so choose to have my child not take this test, and we have to honor that.
Sorry.
So we have to find an alternate placement for that child during the 5 days of SBAC testing, or 10 days, or
Whatever it
however
is.
many days it is.
And the
If a
tests
child comes
are
to school.
40 minutes
Each
Correct.
session's around
Each
40
session.
minutes, yeah.
Right.
and can't leave, right, when you're finished.
No, like if a parent chooses to opt the student out, the student just doesn't go to that class and we have an alternate activity for them, or the parent brings them to school once those testing sessions are done. Right.
Okay, Nick, we're swinging back to you. Thanks, Ralph.
Hey, real quick, I know you guys probably want to move on here. Is there a way to, whatever the equivalent is of this SPAC test at EO Smith, is there a way to monitor the Willington students to see how they are performing at 9 through 12? Obviously with confidentiality being there, but is there a way to monitor their improvement there?
Yes, as I mentioned, 8th grade principals met with Mr. Di Loretto, and he has shared, it's a very, very detailed scatter plot of our students, how they perform on the PSAT, which is similar in showing a student's performance, and then their grade point averages after the first semester. And then we track them each year. So that, yes, there is a way. And again, as I mentioned earlier, our students perform very, very well.
How would we go about getting that for the public to be able to see that?
I don't think it's public information, so we don't even see the names. So it's the middle school, when she said middle school principals, she's talking about typically Columbia, Ashford, Mansfield, and Willington. So we can see the data, and I think he even pulled the names off.
He did.
So we couldn't see, we can only see it by town. But they're tracking that data, and I think even at, we can see graduation rates of students by Willington, Mansfield, Ashford. EO Smith can look at who's going on to college. They can look to see if they're, going straight to the workforce. Those are all the data that they can share. And again, that determines success of, where kids are moving on to.
Okay, so who would we reach out to for that information? EO
I would
Smith?
say the high school
Or-
principal, just to see
Okay.
what information he can probably release,
He could
some
block out
piece
names and such like
without the
that ultimately.
names.
Yeah.
Show the, because the reason we started talking about this, Nick, was, there was a question about, were Willington students, and it wasn't just Willington, it was, other towns as well, how students were prepared for high school at EO Smith, and were they prepared? And the answer by them was yes. One thing that they have looked at is, the number of students from each town moving into higher level classes. And they were noticing that if kids were in certain classes in their freshman year, they would never get there by their senior year. And so, I will tell you that it was typically Mansfield that they were just placing their kids in the higher level classes. And that I don't think exists anymore. It's more even. And you can speak to that,
So-
Arthur.
At the high school level, what they've done is they've taken away the prerequisites for higher level classes in order to give kids who may not have hit that at some point, and because EO's schedule per grade is very regimented, there's a lot of things that you are mandated to take at certain grades, and that's always run into the problem with, it doesn't allow kids a lot of flexibility and a lot of movement in their, what they call, pathways. So what they've done is they've taken away most of the prerequisites for the higher level classes. You can't jump from like a very low level class to a college credit class, but you can incrementally step up without any kind of prerequisite now. And the other thing about that, about the data, Nick, is I am working with the board now to try to present more of that data on meetings, as kind of a reflection of how the school is performing overall. We're still working on that, but that's also in the works. I'm pushing for that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Glenn?
Yeah.
All right. Moving on.
So we're gonna move into the state's growth model. The state measures growth they're looking at two main statistics, and they're looking at either growth rate, or they're looking at percentage of target achieved. And we're gonna start with a percentage of target achieved. This is a demo, so this is not real. This is not, one of our student scores. It's just a demo that they have. It's a comparison of 3 different students. It's based on the student score in 1920. You can see that column. And the state then identifies, based upon their scale score, a target growth number. So you can see student A has a target growth of 69, B is 82, student C 49. The next line over is their next SBAC test. So 2021, they took the test again and their new scale score, and then it shows their actual growth. And then it shows the percentage of the target that they achieved. So the idea is that the students meet their minimum target growth each year. And it depends on what their scale score is for how much growth is needed. The important piece of this is that if you look at student C has the highest scale score of all 3 of them. They have the lowest amount of growth. And so they might be a level 4, and in the achievement side, they look great. On the growth side, and Arthur, this is the balance of what you were asking about last meeting, is trying to see, we need to look at achievement, but we also need to look at growth. It's the balance of both pictures here. This is the growth side of this. So student B grew a bunch, didn't hit their target growth number, but grew a bunch. Student C hardly grew at all. And it's important for us to watch that, and we can see those things, and that's how they calculate the percentage of the target achieved. So it's the simple math, actual growth 50 divided by target growth 69, 72%. questions about just how this works? Because we're gonna show you.
Yeah, I just wanna put it out there because this, for anybody who might be listening, this always confused me because you mix the raw numbers with a percentage. So when it says target growth from 1920 and the target growth is 69, that's 69 points from that 2420. So the 100% growth would be 2489. That always, I mean, the only reason I'm saying is because it always confused me. I always stared at this and was like,
Yeah.
this is very confusing, but that's what that means. So I may be just repeating what you said, but I just want to clarify.
No, and this slide may help. Jen, I see your hand. Let me just do this slide because this may help. So this is how they figure out the targets, right? So if you go back and look at that first student and we said they scored a 2420, you would find them on here where the 2420 was, and you can see it's in, it depends on the grade, obviously. You would find that number and it says the number that is their growth target. So the 2420 for the, you know, if you're looking at the third grade row is 69 points. So that student needs to score 69 points higher in their scale score to get 100% of the growth. That's just the way they do the math. Jen, you had your hand up, I see you.
I do. So this, can you just go back one slide to the student
Absolutely.
ABC? This is based on the SBAC.
Yes,
So we just spent a very long time talking about how the SBAC is not necessarily a representation of like how a student is doing. So if this growth is based on a test that doesn't necessarily reflect how they're doing, I'm not sure what we're measuring. Like,
we're measuring 2 points in time. It's a good question. We're measuring the point in time from 1920 here to the point in time of 2021 on 2 different assessments on what we'll call 2 80-minute blocks over, when you think about school, 182 days, we're talking about 160 minutes. That's what we're talking about. So when they are comparing the growth, they're talking about that snapshot, hoping that over the course of the days that they're gonna gain information, they're gonna do better. They're just looking at this going, okay, we agree achievement is not the only way to look at it. We need to see if there's, you know, look at maybe the growth method of looking at this is a better approach to see if kids are getting better or not. It's still a snapshot though. Does that answer your question?
I guess, I'm also wondering how much of it is test taking, like how much are we measuring test taking versus like ELA skill or math skill?
So that's why we started last year doing the interim assessments, just to expose students to some of the intricacies, we'll call them, of SBAC and some of the math tools that you have to use and some of the tools that you can just play around with, to be honest with you. It's one of the reasons just to expose them to it, but I would say we're not teaching to the test. We're doing it for a reason because I don't know that we believe in teaching to the test. If you want us to, we could do that and our scores could grow because kids are learning how to take this test, this one test better. I'm not sure it's a good use of time though.
I would suggest it's not a good use of time. And I think that we've had many conversations about how we better represent how our students are actually doing. And I'm not a fan of, you know, standardized testing saying every single thing about our kids, because as we have this discussion, this doesn't represent the kids in my house for sure. Like those numbers. I hear stories all the time about, you know, all the things that our kids are learning, all the things that our kids are doing and experiencing. And it's disappointing to hear just based on these test scores that folks are upset about the schools. And trying to
That's
think about.
Part of the purpose of such a workshop is to have professionals here to tell you the value of that data and to let you know, in case you don't, what this feels like for kids and what it is like for them and how it is a very short period of time during their life that they do this. I mean, think about you and your profession. You want your boss to come in and check you out on like your best day, right? But what if they just come one Tuesday at 11 a.m.? Anything could have happened in your life. You could be at your very best. You could be coming back from the flu. It's really difficult to say that that one observation from your employer represents you and how successful you are in your position. And that's kind of how I look at it. You need to like a whole more.
Yeah, and I agree, and I know that that's why we're having this today, to try and figure out a way to better assemble a package of what Willington students are doing and achieving.
Let's look at it a different.
Yeah, because you can't, I don't feel you can look at this one test, say it's a snapshot in time, it's a 1-day thing, but then be happy that the students are outperforming other students in PSATs or SATs, which are much more intensive tests and are over a much shorter period of time. And they're both tests that have, I think, a significant amount of merit. I get that maybe some of like, when you look at like the third graders and fourth graders, and some of them might be younger and might not kind of grasp the whole concept of taking the test on a computer and all that. When you get into high school level and you take a more intensive test like an SAT or a PSAT or something like that, it's a kind of a different ballgame. But if you're going to put value in one test, you have to put value in another way of testing. And I understand that this is not the only measure, but I don't think it doesn't have value.
What we see from when we drill down to each individual student, whether they scored a 3 or a 4 or a 2, doesn't say a thing about how they're going to do in high school.
Right.
So the way I see it is, it doesn't forecast success in the future.
I'm not saying it does. I'm just saying of comparative values, there's value in every testing stage.
Yep.
No matter what level.
Right.
I agree there is, I think we have to be cautious in comparing like SBAC to PSATs and SATs, because there's a different value for students regarding SBAC to PSATs and SATs. You know what I mean?
No.
There's a different maturity level,
Yes.
so their reasoning for taking PSATs is gonna be typically different than their reasoning for taking SBAC.
That's fair.
And there's a lot of individual preparation that goes into those
Yes.
kinds of assessments. And I think that another point to know is that colleges do not require SAT scores anymore.
Not anymore.
Right.
Some of them are coming back.
Some do,
Some
but
of them bring
not
it
all,
back.
not all
that's true.
required.
Depends-
So
depends
it's
on
a
college.
student choice to hand those over or not. So, right, when you look at an SBAC that goes up through our middle school, that is more reflective of the district than something like
Yeah.
SAT. That's a little bit more individual.
Right.
Did you want to mention?
Yeah, so you guys keep mentioning that the SBAC is just like a snapshot of just a moment in time. So between the times, is there any type of workshop or classes going on with the students on how to take tests in general? Not just the SBAC, but tests in general,
Yeah, I mean, teachers
to
do go.
teach like
Yeah,
study skills and
strategies.
stuff.
Yeah. I mean, teachers do talk about how to attack a question, how to break it down, what the question's actually asking, various different strategies around eliminating answers that don't make sense. And we mentioned the FIABs, which are interim assessments where students actually are practicing on the platform, because one of the biggest hurdles is it's foreign to them when they first start. So it teaches them kind of how to navigate the electronic platform where they have to take the test. So we do have those types
Yeah,
of
just
things.
because that stuff not only carries from elementary school to middle school,
Right.
but middle school to high school and so on, so.
Absolutely.
Correct.
And
So that's part of
specifically, the math curriculum really dives deep into what is this question asking? What do I have to provide as an answer? What are the tools I can use to answer? What are my critical thinking skills that are needed to formulate a response to this? Which is not necessarily always seen in some of these tests.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that was
Yep, yes,
being done as well, so it's not.
right, yeah, good question.
All right, Nick, did you want to finish up this slide for us?
So I have two questions. The first are any grant money or anything based off of these scores? Do we get any money based off of having high or low scores at all?
No,
Okay. And second question is on the scores here of like 2,500 or whatever it may be. Would you equivalent to any of these scores to like say 2,500 is an A, 2,400 is B, whatever it is? Because I understand the approach is to see the growth, but for me, like if I lost a basketball game by 25 points and I only lost 15 points the next day, I don't care, still lost, right? I want to see that I scored a good amount. So my viewing of your scores is I want to see a high numbers. How much is the difference? I personally don't care, right? I want to make sure that you're just performing. Is there equivalent of like a 2,500 to an A or whatever it may be?
yeah, it's not really an A though, it's level 3 is grade level, that's the approach, Nick.
Okay.
So, and that's the balance between the overall achievement level and then the other side of the seesaw is the growth. They're looking at both of those things. So when you look at level 3 and level 4, that's the highest, those are the highest two levels that you can have. And when you look at the growth targets here, you'll notice that the students that fall into 1s and 2s have much larger growth targets that they have to hit than the other. If you look at 7th grade, the kid that's getting already at the 4 only has to grow 20 points, where the kid that's got a 1, they're expected to grow 69 points in their following year. So it's not necessarily equivalent to an A or a B, although you probably could, you could compare that. Level 3 and level 4 is really grade level and above grade level. That's what you're talking about.
So are these numbers fluid? Do they move because of a scaling score or?
So what you see on this chart here is not fluid. The kids' numbers will move, but those numbers, as they move in grades, like you can see, if you just look at grade 3, the first box, 2,114.
Yep.
That when you go to grade 4, that number, you better be hitting 2131 or you see what I'm saying?
Sure, I got you.
Up. So by grade level, you're expected that your scale score is going to be higher.
Okay. And from your approach, you guys are trying to put weight into the number of growth, the points in the growth, more so than if it's 2,500. Is that your stance that you guys are trying to approach it from?
It's not really us. That's the state is trying to do that. They're trying to look at growth. I don't disagree with Arthur at all on this, though. In the end, I want to know where kids are falling.
Sure.
We can go back to this slide all day long and go, there's been growth, but let's face it, we've got 50% of our kids that, according to this, don't look like they're reading on grade level. Right? That's the balance between achievement and growth, which is why we pick students apart. We want to know, is this, because there could be 10 kids that are reading on grade level and blew this off, and you don't see that. There could be 10 kids that overperformed, there could be 10 kids that underperformed. We always go back to that. The reason the state goes to this model is to have a balance of both. This is the best part of being a small district. I'm telling you, when you go to a district and there's a grade level of 400 kids, they don't have the benefit of going through every kid individually and just scouring through. It's much harder to do. We talk about kid by kid and go underperformed, outperformed. I know MK and Lisa have notes and so do the teachers, blew it off, finished in 12 minutes. We have that information. I can't share that with you, right? I think we've made phone calls to say, hey, FYI, your child blew this off. So, it's, or didn't, or worked really hard. Like, we have that information.
Yeah, I understand. I was that kid that counted the A's, B's, and C's and D's and made sure they added up, and you would have hated me as a student. But so you're not able to pull those scores out of the test though?
Their actual individual scale score?
Yeah. Well, no, those students that are just circling the A, B, C just to get through it.
Well, they'll be flagged for rushing, or there's some, the algorithm, they'll throw it completely off. Like
Yeah, our teachers literally walk around the room and watch, and if
Okay.
you're sitting there, click, 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 and you're supposed to be reading questions. Hey, Mary Kay, you should probably go for a walk. And we can coach them as best we can and say, please do your best, please do your best. But if they
Okay.
don't, that's all we can do.
Thank you.
These go home to parents.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, the parents receive
They get a
them.
score, yeah.
And the
correct.
scale scores and the little graph.
I also think, and I'm gonna ask you guys this, if there's 40 questions and they do 4 and they refuse to do any more, they're scored on those 4 questions, correct?
Correct.
It counts, that's it.
We've had that.
And we
So-
always tell kids, take your best guess,
Yeah,
because you could be right.
Yeah.
You don't know. Even if you don't know it, just answer it, because it's gonna count against you otherwise.
the math targets, that's this next slide is the same thing. So you can see the growth targets, that's the ELA side of it. You can just disregard the red and the circles. That's what the state uses to say how much growth you need. So there's not, that it's just really the same information just for math. So here are the growth numbers now. And this is what I'm gonna pass off to admin.
Okay, so this is the elementary school aspect, growth, the percentage of target achieved. So, growth and achievement as defined by the state are very different. Achievement or proficiency is a one-time snapshot measurement of a student's academic performance. So growth, conversely, is the change in the achievement score for the same student between 2 or more points in time. So achievement change compares student achievement across years. So for example, the achievement of grade 3 and 4 students in 21-22 is compared to the achievement of grade 3 and 4 students in 22-23, and so on. Growth achieved by all students is counted. So in the blue bar on this slide, you can see the gradual growth of center students in ELA over time, from 41.8 in 21-22 to 57.1 in 22-23 to 71.6 in 23-24. So that's what I like to see, a steady growth, right? This is the average percentage of the target achieved by all students, not the percentage of students who achieved their target. So in math, the percentage of growth was high at 82.4 in the 21-22 school year. It dipped 66.2 in 22-23, and then increased again to 73.4 this past year in 23-24. So with continued focus on our illustrative math curriculum, the upward trajectory and growth, I'm hoping, assuming, theoretically, should continue to grow on the 24-25 SBAC growth that we should see in math next year at this time.
Questions on this slide? I'll see the hall ones first, if we get there's. So, okay.
Yeah, so in our graph, the blue on the bar graph is the growth. And you can see it's gradual, over time from 55.6 in 2021-22 to 56.7 in 22-23, and then to 58.2 in the 23-24 year. This is an average percentage of the target achieved by all students. In math, however, you can see that, the percentage of growth was 70.5 in 21-22. It rose in the second year to 22-23, and then dipped again 67.9 in 23-24.
So this is averaged together for their schools to, all the grades that are tested. So if you look at the next slide now, this is grade by grade. And I think this is an important look. So this report shows that the average percentage of target achieved. It also shows the growth rate for ELA and math by grade level, okay? So you can see the average scale score gain in points, that's the gain column. And then the growth rate in the next column. And the growth rate is the percentage of students who met or exceeded their growth targets. So for example, if you look at in grade 4 ELA, 43.6% of the 39 students met or exceeded their growth targets. Again, I said this earlier, they can miss it by 1 or 2 points. They didn't meet it. So they'd be pulled out. The next column regarding the average percentage of target achieved, it's, if you look in the same row, you can see that of the 39 students on average earned 71.6% of their growth targets. Some students earned 100% in that, ABC student example I gave you, and some students may have earned 5% or nothing, right? So it's the average percent of target achieved for that grade level, and you can see it all the way through for ELA and math. Now, the big picture of all of this. So when we looked at this, we know the growth rate was higher across the district in ELA. In all grades except for grade 7, where you can see a large increase in growth rate for math. Grade 7 was our great anomaly. 80.5% of those students met their growth target. You can see the average percentage of target achieved in grade 7, math was outstanding as well. I mean, it's really good. So when we talk about we need to replicate data, that's the group that we need to replicate. All right. So sometimes you're gonna look at one grade and go, whoa, what happened? And other times you're gonna look at another grade and go, we gotta figure out, is there something that happened there? Is it a great group of kids? Did they get it? Did they work really hard? Was there incentive? What was it? Sometimes it's just a group of kids, but that's the type of data that we want to replicate. We can see that the average percentage of target achieved in grade 6 ELA and math was close to 80%. Again, that's data we want to replicate. Do we want to see 100%? Absolutely. But if we see 80%, we're significantly where our data is today, okay? Now, the not so pretty news on this, when you look at it, you can see lower growth in SBAC in grades 5 and 8, ELA and math. And we need to make sure our current 6th grade group is doing better than what's on here. Do we have that information? Yes. Do the teachers know who they are? Absolutely. Do we have all the, can we sort it every which way to figure out the why? We can. 8th grade group's out of our control at this point in time, but you can see what happens with the average. Take 1 or 2 groups there that hit 30%, 40%, 50%, and it drains the groups that are at 70 or in ELA math, 98.2%. Or sorry, not ELA, in 7th grade math, 98.2%.
And you have children who were in 7th grade when they reached this growth, and I'm certain that you can recognize the excellent teaching that went on there. We actually were able to push, 2 groups of students, 2 entire classes of algebra for 8th grade, which we have never done it before, and we have 2 students who are taking geometry.
Right.
So, I think that the group itself is very, very motivated, but I also think that we had the perfect intervention triangle with the teacher support, with math intervention, special education, co-teaching. It just is a very good model, and we're working to replicate that, as Phil said.
For sure. That's where small class sizes come in to help a lot too.
Yeah.
So that's another factor there.
When you just look at gain that shows that 8th grade group, it's
Out of the ballpark,
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah.
and then you look at others and it's like gain in 4th grade ELA 63, points.
Yeah.
On average, that's
So do you find 100% growth target to be a bit unfair?
I do.
I would say that too, because there's so
Because-
much we can't control.
Right, because you've got, I think it's either the accountability index or the performance index, it's 75, which I find reasonable, because I think every child has their strengths and weaknesses, and I think overall, if you could hit that 75 in a classroom, in a particular subject, I think you're doing well, but I always struggle, and I do think the test has merit, but I do struggle with the growth target being 100%. I don't find that to be a fair target to hit. It seems very lofty.
That's what I say, if we're in the 80s, if we can hit those 80s, I think we're gonna see significant growth across. The challenge is when you look by grade level and They break this out in the accountability index that where they have a high needs column for each of these. And high needs meaning, free and reduced lunch, EL, English language learner, or special education. They pull them as a subgroup. So you can see like, okay, if I pull them out, what does it look like now? Honestly, we have kids that are identified that did very well. So the identification could be all over the place, it just doesn't mean that they're gonna do poorly. But we do see typically, and Marcia, you can speak to this and how we handle it, but we're no different than the majority of districts where kids that are identified struggle on this type of assessment.
And those students are given accommodations to support them, through their IEP, through 504. So those students do have accommodations, but those typically are students who we see struggling a little bit more. And then when you have those students who are not struggling as much and they're making a lot of growth, oftentimes you see that they are now no longer needing special education services. So, that's a fluid support, but there's a lot of supports in place for students who need that.
One of the pieces that, and we're gonna be, I don't even know if you went already, but one of the pieces of the overreach of the state that really bothers me is looking at, what students can qualify for the alternate assessment. And they look at our number, and we got flagged this year for the number of students. We have to go to a meeting to make sure we're identifying the proper, because those students don't fall into this. But there are some students that you would go, wow, they have significant they're identified special education. They have very significant needs. We have loads of data to show it. But they're still required to take this.
Yeah.
Do you think they're gonna do well on this?
It is torture.
Yeah,
I
it is.
say that.
Totally
Yeah.
is.
It's
It's
just,
a total
the
disservice to
child,
those
for the
students.
adult, yeah.
Yeah.
and again, I balance that out to say there are some students who just, we had a student one year that found an error on SBAC. And we reported it. And that student got about the highest score I think that you could possibly get in SBAC. So it's across, the range, but this is the growth piece along, I particularly like the slide because it breaks out the content by the grade, by the growth, with the growth rate and the average percentage of target achieved, because I think those two numbers side by side say something. Okay, so district accountability is the next slide. Here's where I'm probably gonna move quickly through some of this stuff. The State Board of Education is meeting tonight. The 23-24 data is embargoed, meaning I'm not supposed to share it tonight. I have the data for you. I put it in your slideshow. If I get my hand slapped, I get my hand slapped. They're releasing it tonight. They're supposed to approve it at their Board of Ed meeting, State Board of Ed meeting tonight. So I'm gonna share the Willington data. I'm not sharing anybody else's. So I literally got, it's like, I think this came out on Monday. And I pulled the 23-24. So what I'm gonna show here is, so in this measure of how they create a district accountability index. We get these for district in each school. This is what was there for 22-23. 1A through 2D are all connected to high stakes testing, SBAC and science. Then you look at the high need sections that I was mentioning. If you look at 1F, science performance index, high need students, those students that qualify, that are under, again, English language learner, special education, free or reduced lunch. You can see 4A is the chronic absenteeism. That was a number that we get flagged on. We did better this year. You'll see that in a minute. We don't get scored on college career readiness. So when you see open rows, sometimes we don't get scored on things because we're a pre-K-8 district. We do get a score for students who are on track to high school graduation. That is based, and I think this is interesting, it's based on, at the end of their 9th grade year, do they have enough credits that put them in a plan to graduate from high school on time? When they do, we get good points for it. If they don't, we get knocked out. Arthur, I think this is when you mentioned this a few meetings ago, and you're like, what, our graduation rate doesn't look good. This is what I think what you were talking about. And so it's based upon this number. That score only appears on the middle school district accountability and the district accountability, middle and district only. Elementary does not. We don't get the 4 and 6 year graduation score or a post-secondary score. But every school district gets an accountability index in their schools. The last index where we get a score is a physical fitness score. And so I'll share with you this is what we looked like in 22-23. They end up giving you what your max points were and then your percentage of points earned. So we earned 67% of our points. And here's 23-24. It went up to 68.3. So again, this is the district lens. If you want to know what the changes are, I'm gonna tell you that a lot of stuff stayed the same. The changes are we had improvements in our chronic absenteeism. That number improved drastically. And you can realize that COVID protocols probably had a big part of that. But also I think our students' assistance teams and paying attention to attendance had a big part in that as well. We had a decline in physical fitness scores, which kind of is a stab to me. I don't like that. And then we had a decline in science performance. And then we had an increase in on track to graduation. Pretty much everything else, and you'll be able to compare these side by side if you want. Those are the outliers. Pretty much everything else was like, I think 8%, 2%, 3% in, off where it was in the prior years.
So Phil, when we look at the high needs students.
Yes.
You put free and reduced lunch into that category?
They qualify that as high needs students. So they want to know how that they have identified high needs students as that group of students, that's special education, English language learners, and yes, correct.
And so do they report them separately, or do they pull them out of all students and report them again?
So that's what they're pulled out right there. They want to know how high. You can get flagged as a district if your group your high need students are not performing high enough, or or if there's not enough growth. We didn't get flagged for any outliers. But they do pull them out because they want to see how they're doing.
Okay.
And again, this is the great thing. If I showed you our spreadsheet, you'd probably be blown away. I mean, I kind of joke is 50 columns a fair number? I think I drove them a little crazy. What if we added this? What if we looked at date of birth? What if we looked at clubs? What if we looked at, blonde hair? Like it wasn't that. We didn't do that.
You guys can explain everything.
But it has everything in it, and we can sort that. In Ed site, you can do the same. You won't get some of the numbers because we are small, they hide it. So you'll see sometimes where because they don't want, hey, you're a grade level, we're talking about 4 kids, we know we're small, and they're not gonna share that data because of that. We do have that data. It's just not shared publicly.
So I may be jumping ahead, as I learned the last time, but are you going to go through what makes up the index, the pieces of the index here, and how it's designed? Because, remember, I'm one of the people on the board who's not in education. So when I look at your index of your rate versus your target versus your points earned, I understand, it ties everything to high stakes standardized tests, but simplify that for me,
They have created this we'll call it a masterpiece of trying to come up with a fair way between, again, your point, achievements, overall achievement and growth, along with other indices here to identify, give us the district and overall score. So again, if you just look through, the index rate is what your score was. They give you the target. Sometimes it's 100%. Sometimes it's random. 94% your target. Like, I don't know why that is not 100. If you look at number 7, they've created that for us. The points earned is what we got. The math and what there's actually, it's like a duplicate. It's the same math. If you look at to figure out the percentage you earned, the 83.8, 41, if you look at the top line for me, Arthur, 62.8 divided by 675, guess what? It's like 83.8. And then 41.9 divided by 50, guess what it is? It's like 83.8. I don't know why they do it that way, but it's basically the same math. They're just comparing what the target is and looking at a different way.
But what goes into that rate? Like, that's my question.
So
So when you're
they-
at 62, it's not, your target's not 100.
Right.
So you're already skewed there. So it's not like a one-to-one as far as traditional grade points essentially. So I'm just trying to figure out what goes into this index, like just for one A, ELA performance of all students, 62.8. That sounds bad, but when it's out of 75, not out of 100, it's not as bad, but what goes into it?
They're only looking at their math of how how our students performed in ELA. And so they're basically putting an equation. So if we took our district average for SBAC, which is what they're doing here, for all students for ELA, and we're at 41.9, we're being assigned, that's how they're giving us those points. They've basically done an equation to say this is what you earned out of your number. This is the quirky thing, and you're not wrong. This is the quirky thing where I have a problem with it, and it's a little weird. This is achievement, and you're telling me I earned 83.8% of my points? And we are under 50% achievement? That doesn't make any sense to me, but that's how they're trying to balance out all of these items to have some level of value, and they've created what that value is. So a district that has low, they don't wanna crush a district that has low overall performance, had huge growth, has great physical fitness, has great, student attendance, your scores would come up. They're trying not to crush you with just one area. What I'd argue is literally from item 1A down to 2D is all high stakes testing. But they're trying to balance that out. And so they create categories, schools of distinctions, excellent growth. They had watch schools that they identify based upon your scores and overall. They've just created this district accountability. It's pretty complex to balance out a picture for a district. It's a little weird.
I'm still confused with this time.
So we feel really good that our points earned is 67 and the state is 69.3,
Honestly,
or does that not mean anything?
let's just break this apart real in a simple manner. Do you know, based upon what we've shown you already, where our growth was and where our you know those things, and you know there's a lot of room for improvement. We can just say that, okay? So now we're done with 1A down to 2D. Now we're gonna talk about progress towards English proficiency. Well, if you have a very, very, very small number of EL students, doesn't matter. We didn't have any in this year, I believe, which is why it's blank. Did we have a good increase in chronic absenteeism? We did. That to me, we know, good thing to look at. We don't get number 5 or 6. I'll be honest, number 7, a little bit out of our control. Right? Number 8 and 9 and 10, we don't get. I'm disappointed in number 11. And we don't get a score for 12 on district. So in the grand scheme of like how we get these scores, we got a number, an overall district accountability index. I'd rather just go back and look at those specific things. Chronic absenteeism, physical fitness, and our SBAC scores, growth and achievement. That's what we're looking at.
And for us, for middle school, staffing for physical fitness we did have fluctuation in staffing last year with the resignation of Mr. Conlon. We did have a long-term sub that.
That was 22-23. Oh, that was 22-23 though, what we were looking at. Oh, sorry, 23-24, you're right. My fault.
So, you know, that may have something to do, it could have been record keeping, it could, I mean, you know. But it also could have been the rigor of their program and how they did on that on the physical fitness test, because they have different categories for that. We'll do better on that.
Which again, you can only control what you do at school.
Right,
Yeah, after they leave
Right.
your classes,
right,
their families help them decide what to do with their bodies.
right.
So that's,
We're doing what we
Like,
can, controlling what we
right.
control.
I mean, that's pretty important.
Some
These are
physical
from all
activity.
different homes.
Clubs,
Mhm.
we're controlling, you know,
Sports.
the sports side of it. I mean, they have more clubs there at the middle school now than I mean, it's just grown, it's great. That doesn't show up on your accountability. So I'll just fly through these. So if you look at 22-23, there's a CES accountability index. Again, it was 61.8. Go to 23-24, it's 70.7. Again, you wanna know what the difference is, right? Higher scores in academic growth, we got flagged positively for math and ELA. And there was improvement in chronic absenteeism. Those were the big changes. So. Again, did we know that already? I would say probably, yeah. They just found a way to put it all together and give each school a number, okay? You then take all schools, and there's a 22-23 at 66.9. You go to 23-24, it's up to 68.2. And you wanna say again, what's the difference? On this chart, drop in science performance for high need students. We got flagged in that one section. There was a improvement in chronic absenteeism. There was improvement on track to graduation, and there was a decrease in physical fitness. Most of the other items were pretty flat. So do we see that in our other aspect kind of step picture graphic? We do, we know that. So again, not really, we show this because we get out, we think it's important, you know, we get an accountability index score. It's a measure that the state provides, it's the picture of all of these things together. I'm not sure what it does for us, it doesn't change our practice, to be honest with you.
And so I figured out what my confusion was. The performance indexes were not, excuse me, were not presented. That's why I was confused. I got it now.
Okay.
We just went through growth, but now I understand.
All right, let's talk science.
Okay, so, the next generation science standard assessment test is given to students in grade 5 and grade 8. As you can see on this particular slide, there's cohorted data that we've collected, and it allows us to look at the students who took the test in grade 5 and then obviously took it again in grade 8. So if you're looking at the yellow squares in 2020 and 2021, we had 44% scoring at a level 3 or above. As 8th graders, not necessarily the same kids, they're just kids who were in 5th grade in 2020. They scored 46%, which is a slight increase. One of the things that we expect to see as the 8th grade class continues on is that we have implemented full year science. We did not have that when I first arrived at HMS. So with that addition of full year science, we expect to see scores rise. Again, with the cohort, we do have high variability with the number of the kids in the grade. And as Phil mentioned, if you have a small number of kids in the grade, 3 or 4 moving in or moving out can make a big difference. For science specifically, we've implemented a program called Open Sci-Ed, which is an inquiry-based, hands-on science program that revolves around natural phenomena where science standards are all wrapped in. So it piques students' curiosity, they do many investigations, they actually develop those investigations themselves. So the current 8th grade that we have right now, we should see, I would expect to see that percentage would increase. to 65% perhaps or better. It will be very interesting to see how they do with it for the next testing that they do.
When was the last time the science standards were, created or updated?
Next gen science standards, I believe the latest edition was 2017. They haven't really changed. The science standards are very interesting in that they also have cross-cutting content. So you may have earth science, but you also talk about, you know, how communities are built around coastlines or mountain ranges, or, you know, it takes many different concepts and kind of melts them together. So it's a very interesting way of looking at the science and how it's all kind of woven.
Integrated into
Very
ELA,
integrated,
math.
yeah. And the standards are arranged, not according to biology, physics, it's very, very different.
How the children think through.
Right,
so that is-
exactly.
Yeah.
And we're still waiting for NGSS.
Should be next, at the elementary level, should be released next year.
So we talk about continuity, we want K-8, it's not the elementary level.
It also needs to be noted that students in grades 5 and 6 do not have full year science. They have half year science, half year social studies. So that's something that, you know, can be changed, but that's,
Would you recommend?
I mean, listen, I was a science teacher before I took on this lofty position. I believe fully in it, but staffing, space, you know, all of those things, it's a lot. Right now with our science program, we have 7th and 8th grade science teachers, and we have social studies as part of our unified arts for 7th and 8th grade.
And the social studies will be part of CKLA, right?
Yes.
Are we gonna be able to
Yep,
wrap that together a little
absolutely.
bit more?
Yep. Much more integration there along the content, yes.
And that connects with state standards?
Yes, yeah, and
That's
social
good.
studies
Yeah.
was just released this past year.
Okay.
It's
So we're-
literally the next half day that we
Yes.
have, they're all meeting together.
Yeah,
I think something that's interesting on this slide is that the fifth graders in the COVID year performed 61% on their 8th grade test, which is one of the highest percentages on this, one of second highest percent or third highest percent on this chart. I think that's a very interesting anomaly.
yeah, I also think it also depends on the kids and the group, I mean, I know, you know, I can remember who those kids were, so.
And it's before COVID, so things were pretty normal at that time.
No, that was a
No, 22, 23, yeah.
Right, your point is they had a very disrupted,
very disrupted fifth grade and
Fifth grade in
testing
science.
very well in
Yeah.
8th grade in science.
Yeah. Mark, you wanna do this or you wanna kick it off first?
I can go ahead.
All right,
So the next kind of data point that we look at when we're looking at overall student achievement is our iReady benchmarks. This slide talks about grades 2nd through 8th grade math iReady historical data. So the math iReady scores here show the 3 levels of achievement. Below grade level would be the red, approaching grade level would be the yellow, and on grade level would be the green. The idea is that we want to see the green columns increase each year when you follow a row across. We initially started using iReady as a reasonable predictor of SBAC, but it's not holding true as students score higher on iReady, and we may move to other measures for math. Either way, it continues to show the need for improvement.
so if you take that, first, second grade row in 2021, and you follow it across and you can see, the 2, the 3rd grade, 4th grade, the 5th grade. And the idea here is we want to see that, in prior years when I've shown this to you, I have given you fall and winter scores as well. But now, because we've used it for more years, we're just showing you spring. The idea, obviously, the number of kids in the red over the year increases. That's been consistent. But again, the number of kids, the percentage we see in green, we would like to be higher. Again, when we talk about, over testing kids in purpose, I really advocated, this is where you change course sometimes, right? when you reflect on what you've done. I advocated for a district-wide assessment. This started at grade 2. We chose not to do K1 up to 8th grade so we could track kids to see if there's growth. I think we're wasting our time. This is something that we're only using math iReady data now. We pulled iReady for reading because we had CKLA, because we have DIBELS. They've used this in the past to help identify kids for intervention. They have other data they can look at. That's probably more meaningful. A teacher can dig in, and an interventionist can dig into this data. But the big purpose for us when we did this, and prior to this was STAR. We went from STAR to iReady, was really to get a predictor for SBAC, and I think all we're doing is just going, well, we already knew that. I think this is something that's probably gonna go away.
Can you talk a little bit about this assessment itself and what it's like for students and how it works, kind of like how we talked about SBAC, so people know, because some folks might not be familiar with iReady and how it works.
Right, it's very, very similar in terms of the adaptive nature of the test. As the student progresses in skill, the test gets more and more difficult. So, you know, perseverance is really important. We had a good number of kids flagged for rushing initially, because iReady is not, no child is like, oh, yes, I'm gonna do it. One of the interesting pieces of information, though, that teachers noted was that the winter scores were actually, kids did better on that winter score than they did on the spring, which speaks to test fatigue. So we have to take that into consideration, but to answer your question, it is adaptive. So the student's test gets harder and harder as they go on.
On the computer,
On the computer, yes.
it's probably 20 minutes-ish. Some students that work slower could be 40.
Yeah.
Some students work for hours
Hours.
very slowly.
Yes.
Correct.
And need extra, like if they need the time to finish the test, they get the
They get
time.
the time that they need.
They do receive accommodations, just like SBAC. I mean, there's been some kids where it's just really hard, and sometimes we'll say, okay,
That's it, you're done.
Can you talk about, what do you talk, when you say accommodations, Marcia, just share with people what you're talking
sure,
about?
it could be separate settings, so they're taking this test in a small group, quieter setting. Some of them have, math manipulatives that they can use. Some have a number line, a multiplication chart, text to speech, speech to text. There's a lot of different accommodations that they can use. It is untimed, like we said, so there's no, we don't have to worry about timing. But there are a lot of different accommodations, and each either PPT team or 504 team would talk about what those accommodations are and put them in their plan.
The other piece that we liked about this, about iReady, is that, so here's the achievement side, right? There's also the growth side. And so here's the growth side.
Yeah, so on this slide, the typical growth that is shown allows us to see how a student is progressing and growing compared to the average student growth at the same grade and placement level. So the goal is for the individual student, for typical growth, to exceed 100% of what their typical growth measure is by the end of the year. The goals for groups of students is to hit that progress bar. The data shows us that our 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade fell a little bit shy of the 100%, but they still made growth. The 2nd, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students exceeded the 100% goal by a sizable amount. At HMS, we now have, as I mentioned earlier, a certified teacher who provides our neediest students with pull-out tier 3 intervention. And also provide support for teachers, both in the classroom and also in their targeted instruction for tier 2 intervention. We have a math coach, Heidi Aforismo, who she works with teachers to differentiate and teach them how to scaffold the instruction to meet the needs of every student in the classroom. So there may be different levels of kids in each room, but they're supported very well in their learning.
So this slide shows 2 different columns. So one is the annual typical growth, and then the second column on the right is the annual stretch growth. So stretch growth and iReady is defined as the growth recommended for students who are below grade level to reach proficiency, and for students on grade level to reach advanced proficiency. So students who are further behind have larger growth benchmarks in order to catch up to their on grade level peers. So that typically takes students more than 1 year to be considered on grade level. So here in Willington, an average of 21% of students reached their stretch growth last year, which is below iReady's estimate of 25 to 35% of students reaching their aspirational growth. So for math. So you'll see that's a little bit different on the next slide for ELA.
And the 21% comes from, if you look at where my mouse is, this column right here. If you take those
The
numbers right
average.
there and you average those together, that's where the 21% comes from.
So when you say growth on this, you mean between the fall, winter.
Between the
and spring
benchmarks, yes,
tests?
right. So iReady is looking for 25 to 35% growth. So in math, we had 21%.
I think they actually do it by the end of the year, beginning of the year to end of the year. Is
Right, fall to spring,
Right.
sorry, yes, thank you
Yeah.
for clarifying that.
So this next slide is our iReady data for reading, which this will be the last year that we're gonna be reporting on this data because we have changed over CKLA. So we're gonna be dropping the reading iReady. Again, this data was inconsistent as far as helping us predict our SBAC scores. So implementation of all the reading initiatives we're going through should help improve the scores.
So again, we're sharing this with you going, I think this is part of our thought process of testing fatigue and what a spring, the month of May looks like for our students. And being aware of that and really being good predictors of, hey, where are kids really at? Again, they have the growth model here.
So as with the math, we're looking for students to exceed 100% by the end of the academic year. And in this case, each of the grades exceeded this goal. Obviously, we're especially pleased with grades 4, 6, and 7, which, made astronomical growth.
And here again, taking the average of the 7 scores in the stretch growth category, 28% of our students met their stretch growth in language arts as measured by iReady. So that is within iReady's estimate of 25 to 35% of students reaching that aspirational growth. So there was a little bit better scores, if you will, in ELA as opposed to math.
So this, take away the iReady piece for me, this screams, are you providing the science of reading to your kids, to your students? When you look at that first column and every bar is full. We talk about letters, professional development. We talk about providing appropriate phonics instruction. Even though we didn't have CKLA last year, and that's a change started this year, the science of reading work did start last year. I believe that is part of why we see what we see. And really particularly in the elementary, because a lot of the science of reading pieces are elementary based to build the foundation. Whereas in middle school is more of the comprehension. But I think that is really what we're seeing here. And I think that's really positive.
And those things will stay in place even with the
With CKLA, yes, knowing that we need to have high quality, and you mentioned this earlier, the phonics instruction that's there, it's in place. To be able to say our staff is trained in letters is powerful. It's a lot of work, it's extra hours that you pay for as you approve the board, it's not necessarily something they can always fit inside their day, but it's making sure every teacher that is teaching in Willington, whether they're in their first year or their 35th year, that they have the most current research to teach reading well. And it's always been my argument that I think we graduate students a little bit of a disservice. Teachers expecting them to be masters of teaching reading when you only have one class or maybe two. We're changing that internally. That's something that we've done. And I think we're gonna see benefits because of it.
So I know you said you wanted to eliminate iReady because its purpose was a predictor for SBAC testing, but you just made a convincing argument to keep it just for as a measure of progress. So I'm wondering if maybe the solution is a middle ground, maybe you don't test in the winter. Maybe you do a fall test and a spring test and use it as a growth measurement or a improvement measurement rather than an SBAC prediction.
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
So with, so we have done dibbles in the past, so now we're really focusing more on what's called the M class within CKLA. And within CKLA, there's a lot of progress monitoring that the teachers are doing like every week. All the time. So there's a ton of progress monitoring. So kids are being tested always. And the dibbles
Snap it
assessment,
up.
right,
Right.
it's very quick, but it gives a much better indicator of where they are at any given point in time. So the dibbles assessment is still measuring a lot of what iReady was measuring. It's still gonna be fall, winter, and spring. So, but dibbles is, it, for each grade level has different indicators. So, for example, there's at the lower level, lower grades, there's, what is the correct letter sounds, right? How many letter sounds can kids identify? What is their, how well can they, fluently put sounds together, their phoneme segmentation fluency? How quickly can they read nonsense word fluency? What is their oral reading fluency? And so that really gives much more information than what iReady is able to give us. And so we can, teachers can drill down into what specifically, what letters, sounds, nonsense word fluency, where kids need in that moment versus waiting until, you know, when, iReady test benchmarks come out, fall, winter, and
That
spring.
don't match science of reading.
Right, exactly. So the assessments that are being done in CKLA align perfectly to what kids are being taught day to day. They align to the Connecticut state standards. So there's much more of an alignment there, and teachers are able to see in real time what kids need and can, you know, change up whatever is needed in that moment and provide intervention services. So there's so much more that we can do with the CKLA assessments. So iReady is really just, it's another test that kids don't necessarily need to be taking. It's not giving us any additional
It's not
information.
driving instruction.
Okay, but so is the dibbles environment the same as the iReady environment?
No.
So what's the difference?
So the difference is teachers are assessing kids in one-to-one, in person, one at a time.
Technology.
It's not on the, well, they're using the platform. It's a computer-based platform, but the teacher is running that. So the student is sitting in front of them and they're able to assess in real time without students logging into a computer, having to worry about, you know, typing skills.
In essence, you're
keyboarding.
taking away some of that test anxiety for kids.
Correct, right. So they're much more comfortable sitting one-to-one with the teacher.
Okay. While I appreciate that,
Mhm.
and I absolutely do, I think there is something to be said for standardized testing, and I will never, that'll be a hill I die on, because that has been the benchmark for hundreds of years, and it is an accurate, done properly.
Mhm.
It is a useful and an accurate data point. So I worry about drifting away from maybe not even so many tests, but I worry about drifting away from that environment because that environment's not.
So dibbles is standardized. If you're talking about, you're worried about like the ability to sit down and take a test.
Yes.
Different picture.
Mhm.
Part of CKLA is still gonna have unit assessments.
Okay.
We literally just had this meeting on Monday where
Yes.
Right.
this conversation. And one of our things that we're living this year is taking all of CKLA and all the assessments and living them and figuring out what we're going to actually require to go into our spreadsheets. What are we gonna put high value in? Dibbles is not necessarily Dibbles is part of M class, okay? M class is just a platform. Dibbles is a reading assessment. Dibbles is not going away. And, the hill that I was on the other day, Arthur, when we sorted the data 1,000 different ways, if a kid scored a certain number on dibbles, everything else in all of their scores, whether it was science, math, reading, didn't matter, was green. Green being level 3 or 4 SBAC, right? Just agreed. If they were under it, all of a sudden those red boxes and yellow boxes started to show up and we could see it. And that was K through 8. So I put a lot of value, and we had this long conversation about, where does Dibbles fit in this? How can we present Dibbles data to you in the future? Because I do think there's value in it. But then also, how do we keep that? Because you asked some questions about test taking, like there's still some value in that. Kids need to know how to break a question apart. There are still gonna be pieces of that built into CKLA's assessment plan automatically. We just have not lived them. So it should be a balance of both. But we're gonna get more information about the CKLA assessments, and we're gonna get more information on Dibbles than the information. We should be able to look at iReady and go, okay, we're gonna use this for, and I would argue it's not so valid for doing that.
So it doesn't have to be specifically iReady, but I don't wanna drift away from having some sort of standardized test at some point. Whether that be 2 points, whether that be honestly be 1 point, it's one of those things where I'm not advocating you have to keep iReady if there's another way you wanna do it. I just, the skills you learn in test taking are transferable to your adult life.
Yeah.
It's dealing with the pressure, it's like breaking down the question, it's using reasoning skills, that's all things that you kind of gain subconsciously while you take the test. So again, it doesn't have to be this particular assessment, but I would not like to go away from standardized tests. And I do understand that it is just one data point, but I feel it's an important data point to consider in the entire picture.
Does DKLA have an electronic component?
CKLA does, yeah.
DKLA?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So are the kids interacting with it like they do with iReady?
We just haven't lived enough of it yet, and to
You
know.
just- yeah,
Some of
you
it
just
is
haven't
paper
tasted
pencil and writing, and some of it is electronic. One thing that we wanna make sure we're doing is having a balance of both, and also streamlining it, because every paper pencil thing means teachers gotta take it and grade it and put it in someplace, and so trying to find that balance as well. But value in what we are spending time on, right? We're trying to identify what we value. Your comment, Arthur, is really kind of my feeling of, I always want to know what we look at over time. And I'm not against looking at that and trying to find someone. I talked to, I had a meeting with Great School Partnership today with who we have a contract with, and helping drive some of this work. And we were talking about Ames Web, which is a different one. And I went, oh, I don't want a new platform. But it's something that I think we could look to see if there's a one-shot deal. Maybe it's our winter is slower, right? Is winter a time where we could do something like that? And then we're just comparing winter to winter to winter over time period. And we're talking about test taking skills and building in that piece. I think we can consider that. I don't know what that is yet, though. Something we would want to look into. So here's our last slide. And this is the hands. Oh, sorry, Donna Cook got her hand up.
If you want to do the last slide first, and then I'll ask my question, that's fine.
Okay, thanks, Donna. Speaking of Donna Cook, so she said something, a lot of factors and outcomes, right? That's when we talk about scores for students, you have to look at a lot of different factors, because those factors impact where kids are. Did you eat breakfast or did you not eat breakfast? There's just so many different things like that that impact where our scores are. We've created action steps for the district. They're general, they're very pointed, they're very large. I will tell you, number one, we've invested in core programs, what we've talked about tonight, Bridges, CKLA, illustrative math, that has not lived in this district in a very, very long time. And in all content areas. That's a very big positive, and as we roll out CKLA really right now, this year, it's good stuff. We're implementing the science of reading assessments within CKLA over the course of the year. I just mentioned that. We have the coordinated professional development regarding our new programs. I'm gonna be honest, we did a lot of hodgepodge professional development in prior years. COVID money has allowed us to bring in and the actual CKLA presenters. To spend money on things like letters training, we have put our dollars to improve our staff to make sure they're prepared to teach kids well. We're providing the targeted skill support for students in math using the Bridges program. Students will be organized, and this is new. This is something that CKLA recommends. Come around January 1, students are going to be, and this is at the elementary level, they're going to be organized into similar skill groups. So just like we have rotate kids at the middle school level, they're going to be rotating some based upon need, so we can target where kids are at and not try and find the middle ground and go over and differentiate and meet that highest student for a few minutes and then work with small, students that need support. It's going to be grouped, and that is as recommended by CKLA and by reviewing the CKLA data. So that's exciting. That'll be coming soon. We're preparing for that. It's a lot of work, and parents will be getting information about that because it is very new. We continue to work on providing teachers professional development on facilitating differentiated math fluency work through number sense. That's important. There's been a lot of work in that in the middle school because it's something that, if you have gaps in middle school in math, it impacts you all the way through. And so we're trying to fill those holes. Our reading and math coaches, I'm going to be honest with you, they have a heavy lift. And to be honest, Kristen rolling out CKLA, it's been all hands on deck. The administrators have regular meetings with her to make sure we know where to support. Sometimes it's just silly phone calls. CKLA, the company itself, I think got really big really fast. And I'll give you a stupid example. Our workbooks, we found out we're supposed to have perforated pages, and they were sent without perforations, so you can't tear them out. And when we found that out, it's like phone calls. They're sending us like 800 new workbooks of something ridiculous number. So those types of things we're problem solving through. But the time spent in meetings and planning and talking about instruction, and we're getting there. But it is a lot of work for both our math and literacy coach. Talking about instructional practice. We're doing the right things. We all want progress to be like, snap your fingers, let's go. It's slow. And along with it being slow, we also have that sense of urgency. Our data push this year, what I kind of challenge the administrators, like I want every single data piece in one spreadsheet that we can scour together, was a lot of work. And we kind of showed that we probably don't need to do that every year, but we need to make sure we're looking at data and there's specific things we need to be looking at. I really put a lot of value into Dibbles, because it didn't matter if you were in club, it was all over the place. It didn't matter if you were free reduced lunch. It didn't matter if you were, what your gender was, didn't matter. We found a few things that did matter, and that's, we're talking about how we target that. Because those are the things that are going to impact our overall scores. I really do believe that. And last thing I'll say is, we talk about a lot of factors. But in the grand scheme of things, when we get to the achievement side of things, I'm on board 100%. Like, I don't like seeing 40%. That makes my stomach turn. And we don't take that lightly. We want to see significantly higher growth and achievement in all of our kids. I don't care if you're identified special education or not. I don't care what any of your, if you do a club or if you're free or reduced, all of our kids deserve the best from us. And we need to see the percentages come up. That's the bottom line. We all know that. But I think we are doing a lot of really, really strong things. That I think we're going to see growth as a result of it. We've invested a lot of money into programs in the last couple of years, a little bit forced from the state, but it's turned out, I think, for the positive, and I think we're going to see some significant changes coming along down the pike.
Can I ask you about grouping the students by skill level?
Yes.
Is that only within grade level at this point?
So at this point, yes, and the reason why is because scheduling will not allow. And Marcia's gonna jump on her soapbox, I can see it. When we talk scheduling, it's really important to factor in special education needs. Because we have to make sure case managers can be where they need to be. And if some students are receiving ELA at one time and others are not, it just creates madness. And there's a lot of conversation, talk about scheduling, right, and making the change to go to all, full year science, for fifth and sixth. That is no small feat. Changing schedules is a lot of work, but they meet and talk about like, hey, this is not gonna work. Or this will work. It used to be a little bit of choice for teachers, a lot of choice. Back when I was a principal, I don't think there's so much choice anymore. Your language arts block is at this time, so that services can be provided. And unfortunately, it doesn't overlap with others because they gotta be elsewhere.
I want to emphasize again, as we're getting near calendar season and budget season, the importance of that professional development time and days. For the teachers to have a chance to do all the training around all these brand new programs.
Donna was,
Yeah, I want to check back in with Donna.
Yes, a couple things. One, I just want to make sure, you keep mentioning DIBELS. Does that mean dynamic indicators of basic basic early literacy skills?
Yes,
Okay, and then CKLA, is that core knowledge language arts?
correct.
correct, and it's actually Amplify CKLA, pre-K
Amplifies the
through.
company.
Amplify, so see, just to give you a quick crash course in CKLA. The core knowledge program, basically what happened was Amplify is a company that comes in and takes a program and amplifies it. They make it significantly better and make sure that everything is really good in it, quality, soup to nuts. They don't do it for everyone. Only certain language arts programs meet the state expectation for what you can provide for K3 reading. CKLA is one of them, and it's actually Amplify CKLA. I think it's through grade 5, but through grade 5.
Yeah.
And then 6, 7, 8 is not Amplify CKLA, it is just CKLA. But there is a lineman all the way through.
Okay, and then the other thing is, you keep talking about how the tests deal with a point in time. Do you have any information about report cards? Because that would be something where the teachers would be seeing the student over a long period of time. They would be clear about their growth. They know if they've had one bad day or bad moment in time. But when you look at the kids' report cards at the end of the school year, how are they stacking with where they should be? When you look at their grades and their test scores and things like that, as a whole, to kind of mitigate the one moment at a time or a kid rushing through a test.
They don't match. So I would say, and you guys can chime in on this and tell me if I'm wrong, but our report card grades are significantly better than our SBAC or iReady scores. And one of those reasons is because when we talk about mastery learning and a student who struggles in a concept, being able to go back and try again or get extra help and still learn that skill, you don't get that opportunity in a one-shot deal. You get that opportunity through intervention, you get that opportunity through small group instruction. So an assessment's given, the teacher scores the assessment, 15 kids in the class, 5 kids tanked it, 10 kids did great. Those 5 kids, we can meet with them and provide further instruction, and they can improve their grade, which in the end is what you want them to improve and actually learn the concepts. So I would say, and unless you tell me if I'm wrong, but that report card grades are overall significantly better. And that's one of the things we've been asking ourselves, why, what are the differences? Our report card grades so much better than how kids are scoring on SBAC or how kids are scoring on iReady.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's all we have. Any other questions?
Can I just say one other thing that
Yeah.
I think is important? With all of, you know, the CKALA, which is kind of new, the electric, we're finding that our teachers are really excited. And I think that's important to note that, you know, I mean, I've been here for 5.5, going on 6 years now, and we've always heard like teachers saying, we need. And I think we're not hearing that as much anymore. We're really seeing a lot of excitement about the curriculum that these teachers are working with. And when we have excited teachers who are truly invested, we're gonna see student growth. And so I just think that's important to note, because, I mean, I'm speaking for everybody, but at least for me, I know I'm seeing that, the excitement within our teachers. So I just wanted to note that.
Not,
That's definitely passed on to students too.
Yeah.
Right, like, I mean, there are students who are in fourth grade, they're learning about polio, and they're so excited, so interested. A couple of weeks ago, I was in a second grade classroom, they were learning about Hinduism and, you know, just through CKLA, through that social studies and science integration. It's just amazing. And the high level of vocabulary that kids are learning, and, you know, it's wonderful to see, and they're using it in everyday language, you know, like it's really inspiring to see. So thank you for bringing that up.
that's the consistency of so in our homegrown program, the issue was we had 5 different programs. We had the best phonics program, we had the best comprehension piece, we had the best fluents. We're pull from this. It was a ton of work for teachers. They go to one location now. It's CKLI, and it's right there for them. And it's very well done. There's a lot to be said for that. The other piece of that is they know the teacher before them, and they know the teacher that after them is following that same scope and sequence. And I think when there's conversations at the end of the year, it can be, hey, this student did very, very well and you may want to reinforce this skill next year. And it's possible because it spirals. Comes back around.
And we're actually having more of those conversations at the elementary school once a month through our professional learning community, where I'm asking teachers to bring samples of student work, and they're working together in vertical teams. So our pre-K and kindergarten teachers are working together, first grade and second grade. We're looking at samples of actual student work done that day or that week, or, you know, the day before, and looking at the skills and, okay, who needs some more support? And, you know, did you see that last year? How are we moving forward? So I think those are really rich conversations, and we're moving in the right direction.
So there's a couple things I want to ask and bring up. And the first one is I want to go back to something Donna said earlier, and talking about the difficulty of getting to grade level when you're behind grade level and then moving on to another grade. So what's the intervention? What's the plan? What's the procedure for those kids who are already behind, but are then moved to another grade and are now that much further behind?
Well, they're not just moved to another grade without having intervention. So you're right, it is monumental for a student who's below grade level to get up to grade level. We do have that tier 3 intervention where those teachers pull that student out and work on those targeted skills and foundations that student may need to build the commensurate skills coming after it. Kids, you know, we have had kids moving from tier 3, which is very intensive, to tier 2, which is classroom teacher led in smaller groups in the win period. So we have seen growth. It's slow because those gaps are big, and the student needs to master those skills.
And same as in special education, very similar. As students get older, sometimes, you know, we start to see that gap not closing as much, then we need to look at providing them with a different curriculum. So they may be in a special education math class or language arts class. And that's a conversation that we have a lot in special ed, is how do we close that gap? Making sure that they're getting the skills they need, those foundational skills, but also making sure that we're building in the skills so that we can transition them back into their grade level classroom. And a lot of it's individualized on how you're doing that and what skills you're targeting. And that's where the IEP comes into place.
Right. And one of the things that I'm particularly pleased with for our school is that we are finally providing students on the other end of the spectrum the enrichment that they need. Because what we were seeing in years before was kids in the upper end were not, they were still above grade level, but as we saw, they weren't making any growth.
They were plateaued.
They just were sitting there, and we don't want them to sit and not get what they need. So we do have, we have an enrichment math class, we have enriched, we have an algebra level 7th grade class, as I mentioned, we have two classes of algebra in 8th grade. And we're also providing enrichment in the language arts as well. We have WIN classes that do creative writing, we have, different ways for them to showcase their skills and to just continue to grow on an upward trajectory.
Arthur, I think that, the challenge in that is that it's only, so they are in their grade level classroom, getting their grade level curriculum. And it may or may not be supported, right? Depending on if it's, someone that's identified special education, it may just be the classroom teacher doing that work. So they get their grade level content, and then wherever they're behind, they're gonna get in that extra block. And they have to be separate blocks so they don't miss more.
Right, right, no, I
And
get
so
that.
that's the hard part about it, is the time. The biggest impact, though, and I'm gonna come back to our programs in this, when I say this, is that it's significantly harder to change where those students are that are in intervention with significant needs, significantly harder than it is to provide an outstanding tier 1, meaning your general classroom setting, good core program and instruction. If you can do that, that's where you impact more kids. And that's where I think CKLA comes in. That's where, the math program comes in, and IM. Because without that consistent piece and the scope and sequence, you could be teaching the same thing in 2nd grade I was teaching in 3rd grade. We just didn't have conversations, and that's what the problem with hodgepodge is. That's not gonna happen now because of that consistency. And I mean, it came out in my conversation today with GSP, that's where the rubber hits the road, that tier 1, are we providing every kid? And is it high quality programming? And I think we are.
Okay, so I know you mentioned the report card as a good kind of an indicator and a good balance. I'm a bit disappointed that those kind of things. So my point in doing a presentation like this was not just to highlight the testing, but was to highlight the testing along with the day-to-day. The day-to-day grades that you're seeing because I think that's just as important as the testing. And that gives a nice well-rounded picture. So I'm hoping that maybe we could do this again or have more, even just on the board meeting level, just kind of have progress monitoring of, here's the average of what we're seeing in 3rd, or you're coming through with a B- average, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever. But
We could do big picture, in 1st grade, there are this number 4s, this number 3s, this number 2s, this number 1. The challenge for our report cards now, and again, timing of this is like, how many things do you change at once? Our report cards need to be adjusted. The good thing is that they're tied to standards. But they still need to be updated to tie to CKLA and where they fall in what trimester.
Well, that would be K4.
K4.
But, I mean, grading itself, assessing, and even looking at grading, it can be a 3 to 5 year philosophical paradigm shift of how teachers are assessing kids. Some schools have done it and it's wonderful. They do a portfolio and it's mastery based, but it is a huge lift. And we determined that now is not the time.
It's
no,
on my list.
I'm not advocating changing your
No,
grading.
I understand.
Just kind of
The
a
picture.
roadmap as you go across the year. And this way, I think it would give parents a bit more understanding of, like you're saying, you're not performing well in SBAC, but the kids they're not performing well in SBAC, but they're performing well in their day-to-day, which is also very important because yes, test it's a good measure, but it is a snapshot in time. It's one data piece. So I would like to see more as far as we go along throughout the year as a board, kind of a more well-rounded idea of how the students are performing. And now everybody's not gonna like me for the next couple minutes. But it has been, I have the email of what kicked this off, not necessarily kicked this off, but I was here 3 years ago as a parent on these meetings complaining about the scores. And I've argued for many years with many people that they have a plan in place, growth takes time, and I get that it's not gonna happen overnight. But what it would happen if it was done properly, there would be consistency. There would be something I could point to say, yeah, it's not shooting through the roof, but hey, it's getting there. They're climbing the ladder and it's not there. It's incredibly frustrating as a parent and now as somebody who's here in this seat to have to go through this again. Because now again, 3 years later, everybody's excited again. We 3 years ago, we had a curriculum development person. COVID money paid for her to come in and design the curriculum, and that was going to be great. And it wasn't, and it got thrown out, not any fault of us, that was a state thing, and I get that, but it didn't make a difference. The numbers show, it didn't make any difference. I am on the curriculum subcommittee, as Brianna is and as Ann is. And I liked the CKLA curriculum, and I'm hoping against hope that in 3 years, I'm not having this same speech again. Because in 3 years, I honestly might not be here. I might be on the other side of it, yelling at you from the other side of it. But I want to see these kids succeed, and I want to see them do better, and I'm just not seeing it. And if I don't scream this from the mountaintop, it almost seems like it doesn't get heard. And it sounds like I'm attacking, and I'm not trying to attack, but the reality is the reality, and there really has been no consistent improvement from the last time this was broached with the new curriculum. And it's incredibly disappointing as a parent. It's incredibly disappointing as a board member. I'm hopeful, but I really don't want to be here again in 3 years is what I'm saying. So I just hope everybody has the same kind of fire that I have with this. I really do. Because sometimes it's not seen. So
I don't think we disagree. We all feel the same way.
Peter Wiltintich, 97 Trask Road. Thank you all for letting us participate in your workshop. I understand you're going through this internally. And I was also pleased to see the number of our town leaders attended the meeting from different boards. And I think that reflects how important this is to us as a community. I took the opportunity before the meeting to look at our town profile. And I see on here the Smarter Balanced Assessment Score for our town. I'm assuming that's the SBAC acronym you all been referring to.
Correct.
It's consistent with what you showed in the beginning of the presentation. We're in the 40s. And that's my kind of like 10,000 foot view of this. 60% of the students leaving our system are below the state standard for what's expected of them. And from what I understand, it's not a high bar. That's something like a 70 or a C is the way it was explained to me by others. I'm not sure if I'm correct there. But that tells me something's wrong, simply put. And I see here our management team, the principals, the superintendent. We have a $10 million budget, or approximately $26,000 per student. We have small class sizes, so it sounds like we have all the resources we need. What's the plan? Is there a management plan so that we can say as a community, 80% of our students leaving our system are at grade level, not 40? Is there a management plan in place? Is it the expectation of this Board of Education that that plan be implemented, and is a timeline to get there? That's kind of my question.
Is that 40% from the SBAC information you're referring to?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and I agree with everything you're all saying, that tests are one form of measurement, you know, and it's a metric, but it's telling us something. That's where I agree with Arthur. And it's telling me that the majority of the students leaving our school system are not at a level that is a reasonable expectation. So I'm asking Brianna, you as chair and the board, what is the plan? What is the timeline? And how do we get to the majority of our students leaving our school system at the grade level expected by, I guess, our state or the academic standard that's currently in place?
Yeah, super good question. I think that's on everybody's minds, and I agree with you. It's really nice to have participation this way. I hope from the recording, we'll have a lot more questions coming at us. And, you know, speaking of budget season, like these are all things you need to know about our district, right? And like things, battles we're fighting, things that we're working on, thinking about. You cannot use the Smarter Balance Assessment as your only piece of information, your only data. That 40% is just that one thing. There's a whole lot of other assessments that go on during the school year in a variety of ways, shapes, and forms. You heard about the DIBELS, for example. There are end of chapter math tests that are going on in the classrooms. There's a whole lot of other things that are checking on how our students are doing. And the biggest purpose of assessments is not only to tell families how their child is doing, but to inform the educators about how they need to go forward with their students. They do data-driven teaching. So like for me, if my, do I want on my parent hat or my teacher hat? As a teacher, if I have a student who takes a big standardized test, of course, I'm gonna look at that information for that child and compare it with my class, compare it with my colleagues in my grade, look town-wise, district-wise, maybe statewide and more, right? But quicker things like sitting down with a student to do like a DIBELS or some other quick form of assessment that is effective is going to give me way more information, and it helps me teach them at their level what they need quicker. I can't really do much about the SBAC because of the way that it's the standardized portion of it and the testing of it. A lot of it is stuff that's not necessarily in my content area, for example. So all I can do is look at that, use it for what it is. But when I'm teaching my students, I need to be able to do quick things that are gonna tell me what I need to change to address them. And I don't only address my class, I address each child differently, which is something that has changed a lot about education since I was a kid, certainly. I'm like an 80s baby, right? 90s baby too. So but anyway, you know, like it was everyone in the classroom learned the same things at the same time, the same way, and you didn't really have a choice. You kept up and that whole clump moved. Well, it's very different now. And that if you have 15 students in your class, you are teaching every child to their specific level. And that takes a lot from our educators. It takes a lot of creativity on their part. And so doing those assessments kind of helps us group students a little bit better, because for me to do 15 groups is going to be pretty hard in like a reading lesson. But if I know these children have a similar difficulty with letter naming, I'm going to put them in a group and do it that way. That's kind of what they were talking about with the CKLA and having kids go to different teachers by grouping. That makes it a lot easier for the educator because they're going to be able to focus on what those 5, 10 kids really need. Okay, and so like that's the purpose of our assessments, is to help our teachers know what to do so that the students can improve. I heard our administrative team talk about absenteeism. That's something that they address. They listed a whole lot of things that they're doing to try and help with that. Something else was a little bit of parent-school communication. I think that's sort of what you're thinking about too, like how do we help parents better understand and give them more information so they know how their child is doing in the grand scheme of things, but also how their growth is coming along, because that's important too. And again, I want to say too, like we can only control what's happening in our district. We can only control what happens during our school hours. There's a lot of things that happen in the homes, in the communities, in children's personal lives that we don't have any handle on. All we can do is take them where they're at, take them with what they know, and help them grow to the best of our ability. So your question was, the big question, what's our plan? What are we doing? We've implemented some new curriculum. Our staff is trained and will continue to be trained in all of these things. So we know we've got our teachers educated. They're excited. And to me, when I hear putting a bunch of training into staff and then they're excited to use it, all I can hear in my head is teacher retention, because it's pretty awful when you have teachers leaving on the fly. But if you've put years and years of training for a program we're using into an educator, and then they leave to go to a different district for whatever reason, you now have to train somebody new. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're investing our training in that educator. We need that person to stay with us. So teacher retention kind of becomes important in our district too. We need that educator to stay with us once they're trained, use with, and pass their children on. If you're a brand new teacher, it's a little bit hard. You have to start all over again. That can be a little bit detrimental to some of our learners also. So that was something else that we talked about. I think we have a pretty clear and frank view of how things look, looking at these assessments themselves. But I don't know, sitting here, how each student in the first grade is doing, because I did not talk to the first grade teachers. They know their students way more than any of the numbers we looked at. And they could tell you exactly with each child what their child is excelling at and what the educator is concerned about and what they're working with that kid to do better on. And so our staffing and their training is really important. And like you said too, like having community understanding and support is important too for the home life of our students, but also helping us as a town move along these children. Like, they're our greatest gift that we give to the world. And I want them to be as prepared for big things as we can get them, Does that answer that at all? A little bit? What is our plan? We're gonna use our new programming. We're gonna keep assessing kids so we know how to change what we're teaching and how we're teaching it.
Thank you.
One other thing, when I asked the question before about other towns, and I'm looking at this one. And when you look at how our bars, this is the state, this is our bars. I don't think the state results are all that great. Am I correct? Yeah.
Correct.
Right, so it's not like there's people in the state that have 100, and I think this looks like the state average, and we're pretty much right up there with them. So I think we do need to grow, there's no question about that. But I think that's another consideration, and part of this is the fault of the test. If it was a truly excellent test, there would be scores that are all the way to the top. So I think we're doing the best we can with what we have to work with that the state's given us and told us we must use.
Jen has her hand up.
Hey, Jen.
Hi, I just wanted to kind of respond to Arthur a little tiny bit. I appreciate the conversation about packaging the day-to-day along with the larger scale assessments. I feel like that's really important, and that is in fact kind of the wish, right? So if you just have the SBAC, we've all had a long conversation tonight about how that isn't necessarily representative. So what metrics are we going to use based on all of the things that we heard tonight to measure, if you will, students from year to year, so that, as you said, Arthur, we're not having this conversation in 3 years, because the SBAC is probably still going to be around, and we could spend another 2 hours talking about how the SBAC isn't necessarily the best representative of our students, but what is in fact, what can we start now or look at now or pick out of the numbers we already have now to say this is a definitive way that we can talk about our Willington students. We can have the SBAC scores, which yes, this is all the qualifications of it. But these scores are the day-to-day where the rubber meets the road. We can look at them as a board. Parents can look at them on our website and say, wow, that's really great. And teachers can report on them and admin can report on them. What are those things? And maybe that's not a today conversation, but I feel like it needs to be talked about so that we don't have a repeat of this conversation, as you said, 3 years down the road.
I'm just thinking that education is always changing and moving, and it seems to me in my 20 whatever year career that about every 3 years, big major changes happen and we all have to reroute Yes. How will you respond to that, Billy?
So, a couple things. One is this goes back to our admin meeting about what is going to be the new? If it's not iReady, what is it going to be? And I'm gonna tell you, I think that we could present Dibble's data to show you just really bluntly, like, hey, in first grade, at the end of the year, there's 35 kids and this is the number of kids at grade level. I mean, we can give you that data. It's just averages. It's taking a kid's name out and figuring that out. And then because there are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns at that grade level, trying to figure out, do we do that for every column? Like, that's stuff that we can figure out. Because I think if we can present that and say, we're demonstrating to you that kids can read, and these are the kids that can't read, and we had this conversation at admin. If they're in the red, are they in their intervention? Are they identified for special education? If they're not, what's going on? You better have some backup information for me, and they do. So Dibbles is one. Math, I don't have a good answer for you yet. The Bridges stuff might be helpful. I think the illustrative math, the day-to-day stuff, I think we can look at the assessments there. I'm also thinking about my kindergarten teachers are gonna kill me. Part of the state debacle, I'll call it that, with the change of incoming grade age for coming into kindergarten was assessing kids for families that wanted to make sure their kid could qualify. And finding a way, I think it's important, and we don't have this data. I have not seen this data. I wish I could compare, Peter, for you in particular, where our incoming kindergarten kids come in, and it's where incoming kids come into Glastonbury, and where kids come into Mansfield, where kindergarten kids in some towns come in reading, and some of our kids come into kindergarten. Not all. I'm just saying, I think it'd be good data for us to look at. Some of our kids are still not toilet trained. There are assessments that are standardized that we can look at, that we could take our 35 incoming kindergarten and say, this is where they're coming in. I think that's an important picture for sometimes for where kids are at and what their first 5 years of their life look like. And it's not a shot at parents, but we have a lot of kids coming in that are not prepared. And when we look at what standardized levels look like, because they exist for a 4-year-old in 6 months and a 5-year-old in 0 months and a 5-year-old in 6 months, those standards exist. And we know where our kids can fall. I think we could share that information. Arthur, I think from my perspective, I think having a 3-year checkpoint about where we should be each year, with a caveat that I can't control the kid that moves in tomorrow. That's part of the cohort piece that's important to us. I expect the kids that are here from K-8 should be outperforming kids that come in unless they've had some other experience. So if the student comes in and they are on below grade level, that shouldn't hurt our presentation if we're meeting where everybody else is. So that's a few things. I think that day-to-day stuff is something that we need to talk about and figure out how to present it to you. So it is not just here's SBAC, here's iReady. It's a piece of the puzzle, but there are other puzzle pieces that we can show you as well. I think that's important that we do that.
Kindergarten is still screened for the state. Do you remember doing that state screening for kindergartners, or is that?
Yes, it still exists when they send it.
KGI,
Yeah.
Kindergarten Action Center.
Yeah.
It's open now. Yes.
Is that valuable at all or no?
I I was a kindergarten teacher for many years. I don't think it is. It's really subjective. It's a Likert scale. So, you know, scale of 1 to 4.
What was I talking about? Not the the Basque is stuck in my head, Marcia. It's not the Basque.
Is it like the elm, is it elms, that's preschool. In our.
You're talking about the waiver screens?
There's it's like the grade level expectations and it's by birth year. It might be connected to birth 3.
Not the Brigans.
The Brigance, thank you. The
That's it,
Brigance.
yes.
It's the assessment that I was thinking of. That there's like a speedy Brigance that you could do that would paint the picture for us. Just, again, it's a picture, it's a puzzle piece in the grand scheme of looking at where our kids come in. I can't tell you where Mansfield kids come in, but I can tell you, I think it's higher.
Well, the early intervention piece, right? I mean, kids
Something,
who are receiving preschooling programming and kids who aren't, you know, there's a difference there.
when they've had no experience whatsoever, which we do have data on.
Now, one thing about Mansfield is I believe that you can generally get into pre-K. They have large classes, they're 18 with an IA, but you can, so everybody who wants a spot in pre-K, I believe, could get a spot. That might be one small difference.
It's just, again, it comes back to all the puzzle pieces and trying to figure out what is meaningful for you, for the community, and then also, us living CKLA especially, and identifying what those pieces are that would be meaningful to you to share, like, hey, we're gonna share this information with you. And oh, by the way, we're really counting on if they do X, Y, and Z in CKLA and Dibbles, that we really do believe that's a predictor. This is how they're gonna score an aspect. I know, Ralph was
Yes,
saying
Ralph.
too.
Is it my turn?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I want to share a couple observations. I would not want to be a parent today, searching for a town to relocate to and trying to evaluate test scores because it's mind-boggling. Probably because I come from an era where we had simple letter grades. I know earlier it had been mentioned about tracking progress over a period of time. And seeing the trajectory of that progress on a chart, a graph, would be insightful. And especially if a family is looking to relocate and they're comparing to surrounding towns. I know that to Mr. Stevens, that may not matter as to how the schools are managed here, but for parents trying to understand all this stuff, it's mind-boggling. Another observation, it was once said at an SBC meeting that we need to build a new school so people will want to move here. Does having a new school trump the value of a first-class education demonstrated by test scores? We could have dismal scores, a brand new school, and also the highest property taxes in the region. I don't think that would make Willington very marketable for new residents. But on another note, there's an 80+ parcel of land that just went on the market. I'm very familiar with it. It's in an R80 zone. It could be a 30 lot plus or minus subdivision. How many kids will that bring into our school? And will it bring kids if our test scores aren't understandable by parents? But conversely, the same parcel, given its proximity to 84 and its frontage on Route 32, would be attractive for commercial development. The latter would be great for our grand list expansion, and I'm sure everybody on this board realizes the benefits to that, because it would be a reasonable financial boost to our budget. But the townspeople don't seem to want that kind of development on a parcel of that size. So anyway, just some observations I thought I would share with you all. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Donna?
Yeah, I was thinking about some of the stuff that's been discussed and I appreciate it. One of the things I was thinking about though is like when Phil was talking about the kids coming in, let's eliminate people moving in from out of town, but just people that, the kindergartners, the pre-K. It would be really great if the school could, or the town could offer a program maybe once or twice a year where they let parents know what resources are out there. Because I know what I did, so my kids knew how to read, but that doesn't mean everybody else has the same resources. There's groups like Building Healthy Families in Manchester that actually teach parents how to be parents, to give them an idea of menus and the importance of play and the importance of reading to their children. Some people haven't been blessed to grow up in a family where their parents knew how to be good parents. And when you can't control the outside, but if you let people know resources that are available to them so that they can choose to participate in if Connecticut has a Birth to 3 program, or MomCo, or Hooked on Phonics, or Building Healthy Families, or just the importance of story time at the library, it might help the kids coming into our school system to be on a better footing so that they can grow at the rate that they're supposed to, instead of playing catch up when they're first walking in the door. And I don't know if you've thought about something like that, but that might be really helpful for the parents and grandparents or people that are providing childcare, just to have some ideas and some resources so that the kids get a better start. Thank you.
Can I ask you something about that, Donna? Because I was in a professional development conversation last week, and my colleagues and I were talking about some of the struggles that we are experiencing in early childhood education. And we were talking about working with parents and supporting parents, and the difficulty of seeing a behavior in the classroom, the teacher handles it a certain way and is very effective, and then you hear that the parent is having the same difficulty at home, but there's sort of this barrier whereby the teacher cannot give their recommendations to the parent all the time. Sometimes it's a little bit too like telling the mom and dad what to do, and that's not received very well, so you have to be careful with kinds of things. I mean, obviously you can share what you're doing in the classroom that's working, but there's a little bit of that. So one of my questions I had about that actually was, what kind of like credentials would a person need to have in order to do a presentation or a class like that? Like, what would you recommend that person has, experience-wise or education-wise?
Oh, I'm thinking more of, hey, did you know these resources are out there?
Yeah.
Not necessarily, I mean, my kids are grown, so there are certain things that were available when they were growing up that may not even be available anymore. I know that we bought, or it was bought for us, the Hooked on Phonics program. I can tell you that it worked marvelously. I will also tell you that I spoke to an educator before that was purchased, and was told that in their school system in Massachusetts, the kids in high school that were struggling with reading, they solved the reading problem by giving them Hooked on Phonics to use. So something like that, where, I mean, at that point in time, you put a tape in a tape recorder. I'm sure that the program has advanced, but just being aware that there's these organizations out there, not necessarily endorsing them, not necessarily saying you have to take your child to this or you have to do that, but just information, that there's groups of moms that meet and they work on being better moms. There's Building Healthy Families that works with families to give them skills on nutritious menu planning, how to do things that will help your child to develop, the importance of things, because, and not everybody is aware of the same things, and not everybody's been exposed to the same things, and you might have resources out there that can help with. It's not sitting the parents down and saying, we're going to teach you how to prepare your child so that when they walk into the door at kindergarten, they're ready to go. It's making them aware of maybe some of those benchmarks if you don't know that they're supposed to know something by a certain age, you may not know that there's a problem that needs to be addressed. Knowing that if Connecticut has certain resources, that if a parent has a concern or a grandparent has a concern, that they can, where to go to reach out instead of waiting till they walk in the door for kindergarten. Not so much an instructional class or this is how you have to discipline your children class, more of information so that they can find what will work for their family and their time schedule, because they may not know that those resources are out there.
Right, gotcha. Yeah, of course.
I'd like to speak to that a little bit, just knowing our counseling staff in both buildings, they have such a vast knowledge of our area resources. That is definitely something that they do when they're working with families, to be able to offer resources, help them find resources. So I know that is something that our counseling staff do, but, you know, I also wonder if that can be a collaboration with our human service department too.
Yeah.
Thoughts on
Larger towns have family and community liaison personnel that does that, outreach programs and a clearinghouse of resources, a lending library for parents if they need it, a way for parents to get the information.
Yeah, because part of the challenge is you don't know what you don't know till you know it. And
Right.
and that way, and you know I'm always learning new things. And I think it would be great if there was a way to let families and community members just know what's out there and what's available and how it might help their kids.
Yeah, thank you for shedding some light on our early childhood group because it starts really young. You're right about that. So the more support we can put there, definitely we'll see better outcomes coming on down the line. Okay. Did we have anybody else on the Zoom who wanted to comment? Okay. Either of you want to share any further? Talk more later, maybe.
I will just say one thing, just tagging on to what my mom said. I would definitely encourage for any like kindergartners or pre-K coming in. Maybe just shoot like the parents an email about the hooked on phonics or something like that, because as someone who did it, it was critical. And I looked at it recently, they have online things, so the parents can read it with the children, and it's interactive in a way that both parents and educators can do it, and they can see how each other is doing. So it just creates a little bit more of a connection and fosters more of a cohesive educational experience for both the parents and the children.
Yeah, it definitely takes a team, right, at home and at school. Good. Jen or John, did you wanna, okay, good, thumbs up.
I'm all set.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, well, I want to thank our administrators, you're all wonderful and very well educated and definitely have your fingers on the pulse of our kids and what they're doing and what they need. And thanks for always supporting our staff because that's like the conduit. The service provider is really important. And thank you, Mr. Stevens too, for participating and gathering all this information for us. And hopefully, yeah, hopefully we have a little bit of a better idea of a more holistic outlook on how things are going and making some plans about what we're gonna do about it. Yeah, okay. Do we need to have motions for these things? Okay, I will motion to adjourn at 9:37. Can we get a second? John, you can have.
So, I mean,
Favor?
Aye.
Yes, great.
Yes.
9:37,
Aye.
thank you, everyone.